Chapter 1029. Cough, cough, cough here. Just under the ruins of the dungeon, an iron hand stretched out with difficulty. With great difficulty, it crawled out of the deep passage. The sublimator with a scorched face and only layers of steel and broken parts finally crawled out. He opened his mouth and spat out a large cloud of thick smoke. Under the cracked silicone face, electric sparks flashed around his pupils, and he coughed violently. I say, have you forgotten that you still have teammates? Even though he had been racing against time to escape from the demon's clutches, he was still a step too late in the end. He could only temporarily homogenize with the red dragon, and Raymond almost died on the spot in that explosion. That's not right. I estimated this yield. You have the red dragon's shield on you. It's absolutely fine. Huaisher scratched his head and looked to the other side. Look, isn't Professor Anton fine too? Under the ground that Raymond dug, a mechanical ladder rose up. The old man staggered a few steps, and the thick protective suit that was like a spacesuit was still smoking. The viscous shock-absorbing layer leaked out from the gaps and quickly condensed when it met the air. Barely, no problem. Anton fell to the ground, rubbed his sore waist, and said helplessly, "Next time, please remind me to install 2 more shock absorbers on the chair." Even if they went deep underground and built 3 layers of shelters, they still almost couldn't withstand the aftermath of the explosion. Next time, definitely. Huaisher looked away awkwardly. After the remaining 2 teammates were carried over by the red dragon, he pointed to the boiling molten iron in the lake beside him to Raymond. He rubbed his hands excitedly. "Please, friend," he said, "it's time for us to advance." Raymond looked at the molten iron that had melted countless hells and countless huge corpses by the lake. He subconsciously swallowed his saliva, and his scalp went numb. "Wait a moment. I need to go to the toilet." "No hurry." Huaisher stopped in front and smiled. "There's still time after you advance." Cough, cough. Raymond shrunk his head and mumbled, "I haven't brushed my teeth this morning." "Why don't?" "It's okay. We celestial genealogy don't care about bathing and changing clothes." Huaisher comforted her. "It doesn't matter even if you don't wipe your butt after going to the toilet. Hell won't care." "Wait a minute, I think." Raymond still wanted to try one last time, but Huaisher was already impatient. He directly stabbed him with his sword. "That's enough." Puff! The sword of virtue pierced through his chest and protruded from his back. Everyone widened their eyes in shock and disbelief. Raymond raised his head in confusion. "What are you doing?" This." Huaisher looked at them with a dumbfounded expression and finally reacted. "Sorry, I thought everyone would advance like this, so I just happened to do it." "Sorry." After saying that, he didn't give Raymond a chance to dawdle. He directly kicked him into the metal lake. "Anyway, let's go." A blood-curdling scream flashed by. The surging metal lake instantly swallowed Raymond's figure. Even the red dragon couldn't help but transform into a streak of light. Under the guidance of the secret apparatus, it sank into the lake and disappeared without a trace. In the blink of an eye, countless ripples appeared on the surface of the lake, accompanied by a majestic fluctuation of origin substance. Above the secret apparatus on the shore, the remains of the incomplete crowns suddenly trembled violently. Dazzling light blossomed from the cracks in their bodies. Their broken bodies cracked, and the departed souls let out ear-piercing screams. They were involuntarily swept into the lake. In the blink of an eye, the surging metal lake greedily swallowed up all of Hell's souls. The originally dazzling colors disappeared, turning into pure darkness. Countless phantoms appeared in the bone-chilling darkness. It was like a ladder that led deeper into the abyss, pulling countless souls into the darkness of hell and embracing eternal slumber. Countless phantoms of the underworld in Egyptian legends rose from the darkness. If Anubis was advancing, what appeared at this moment would be the phantoms of 42 spirits of judgment. The person advancing would have to pass their test before hell dissolved them. They would have to state their names and engrave their imprints on their bones. Finally, they would have to offer their heart on the scales of judgment. However, at this moment, what appeared was a meandering river with no end in sight. Accompanied by faint waves of smoke, countless spirits appeared from the river. They looked at the floating corpse with resentment and continuously stretched out their hands to pull at his body. Every time they reached out, they would peel off Raymond's remaining flesh from his body. In the end, only a pure skeleton with a metallic glow remained in the river formed by the metal lake. Even his soul had disappeared. But before the last of the evil spirits could pull him to eternal death, a stone heart soaked in dragon blood appeared in his empty chest. With all his might, he pulsed. In an instant, a low rumble of thunder reverberated between heaven and earth. In the empty eye sockets of the skeleton, blood-red flames lit up. Then, countless ribbons made of steel appeared from the void. They wrapped around him layer by layer, completely wrapping him into a mummy. After going through the baptism of pure death, he had completely abandoned his mortal body. Only then would he be qualified to board the sacred ship. The moment the mummy was formed, far away in the village of Dusk, the incomplete heavenly prison fortress suddenly shook violently. The awakened core burned with light. Dozens of bright lights flew out from it. In an instant, they passed through the distant depths and landed on the mummy here. They surrounded Raymond's body, forming a solemn iron coffin. Like a ship, they carried him and floated on the underworld river. On the surface of the iron coffin, all the large groups that had merged into the metal lake turned into layers of relief sculptures. On the 5 sides, the faces of the crown wearers appeared. In the turbulent underworld river, the iron coffin floated faster and faster. It was like a projection of the underworld river that was absorbing and swallowing a whale. It grew rapidly, and the outline of a towering ship appeared. In the darkest projection of the underworld river, a ray of light quietly appeared. It symbolized the blazing light of the sun. It was reflected in the underworld. Then, the heavens broke. From the loud roar of the breakthrough, countless cracks appeared in the sky of the thunder-white plains. Pairs of eyes appeared from behind the cracks, looking ferociously. And at the end of the land, one army after another swept toward this place like a tide, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. This projection was so realistic. Even Huaishir couldn't see any falsehood. Could it be the legendary sky demon seizing the way? So cool. Huaishir exclaimed. Does the Eternal Road have such a formation? No, I guess this probably has nothing to do with Raymond. Forster's eyesight was the best. He saw Hades on the war chariot at the back of the formation. His face was full of viciousness and killing intent. The old sailor coughed awkwardly. They're either organizing a spring excursion and happen to pass by, or they're here specifically to mess with you. Along with his words, at the end of the horizon, that surging tide was still slowly spreading out. Countless figures turned into boundless gray and black. After sealing all of the exits of the white lightning plains, they pressed forward step by step, encircling this place. And above the shattered sky, huge figures slowly appeared and were slowly squeezing into this narrow underworld. Under the attraction of a secret instrument, a colossus of destruction descended from the sky. The colossus of death made of iron and stone was hundreds of meters tall. Its body was greenish-black, and there were 3 overlapping sharp light wheels above its head. Behind it, 2 pitch-black wings spread out. Everywhere it passed, under the cover of the halo, the earth shook violently. Countless stones and soil were thrown to the sides. It was as if a giant who moved mountains had descended here, trampling on the earth that had long been tormented. Before that, countless arrows and blazing lights had already descended from the sky like a storm. Densely packed, they covered every inch of the earth. It was a saturation attack. Gregory's face was pale. The shackles formed by the primordial soup on his wrists disappeared without a trace. Instead, they were replaced by 2 rows of complicated and ancient tattoos. At this moment, the miracles sealed in the tattoos in his body were being consumed at a speed visible to the naked eye. An ancient lighthouse rose from the ground, burning with light and turning all the attacks into illusions. But in the distance, the endless tide of people was still surging, as if there was no end to it. It was overwhelming. Even a Tier 5 wouldn't be able to enjoy such a battle. right? Forster took 2 puffs of his cigar, took out his double-barreled shotgun, and counted the bullets. In the end, he realized that in such a battle, someone like him who specialized in survival, ambushes, and assassinations was completely useless. I have to say, although it's expected that there would be pursuers, but this reaction speed and number are completely unexpected. Fleischer was completely numb. How many people did Hades mobilize to mess with him? Just the number of people in the underworld that he was currently observing should be no less than 100,000, right? Not to mention the huge war weapons that were gradually squeezing into this underworld. Everyone's expressions gradually stiffened. They couldn't understand why someone would use a cannon to attack them when they just came to steal a watermelon from the underworld. Was it necessary? They looked at Fleischer with particularly strange gazes. What did you do, kid? You actually have so many enemies in the underworld? Fleischer, can you perform that again? Forster looked at the young man behind him with anticipation. The one that will explode? He made a boom gesture. Bomb? Fleischer asked. Yes, that. Forster's eyes lit up. Do it again. I'd like to. Fleischer covered his face and sighed. Did you think that kind of thing could be casually placed? Just to create such a large metal bomb. He had used up more than half of the source crystals and the supplies stored on the Red Dragon. In addition, he had also used the curses and molten steel accumulated over hundreds of years in the Thunderwhite Plains. In the end, he had thrown more than half of the city and most of the large groups into the pot. More than half of the Crow had received the rebirth card. Only then was he able to brew such a big bomb. Even if he wanted to create another one, he would need another spendthrift to pay for it, right? Otherwise, who would he blow up? To blow himself up? Then what should we do? Forster took out Misery, and the image of a mosaic wolf dog appeared on the title page. How about I call the wolf dog out? It has just recently passed its transformation period, and its temper is a little fierce. Wait a moment, I'll try again. Fleischer shook his head. The only thing he could do now was to try his best. He braced himself and poked his head out from behind cover. Just like that, he raised his hands and made a gesture of surrender. He squeezed out a sincere smile and said, Wait a moment, Hades. I think there's a small misunderstanding between us that needs to be resolved. Do you see that? It's that naked man. Hades expressionlessly pointed at Fleischer from atop the war chariot amidst the tens of thousands of soldiers. He then ordered the towering war elephants behind him beat him to death. An instant later, the war elephants began to roar. The metal giant, hundreds of meters tall, leapt into the air. The halo above its head glowed with a scorching light. Immediately afterwards, a destructive light shot out from its massive eyes, enough to pierce through countless city walls. At the same time, the image of hell behind the lighthouse suddenly dissipated. Following the explosion of the metal lake, an ancient battleship glowing with a resplendent golden light appeared in the air. The deck was like dragon scales, and a flame-like glow surrounded the ship. Hundreds of oars on both sides of the ship stirred the air, creating ripples in the water. At the front of the ship, a ferocious scarlet dragon had appeared. A tidal wave of origin substance rippled out. In the legends, this was a vessel that had once carried the power of the primordial god. The miracle of traveling through the primordial chaos and carrying the blazing sun and the gods had reappeared here. Sunship, do you see that? Why, sure. Raymond slowly rose from the deck with his arms crossed. As he sensed the boundless power in his body, he couldn't help but tilt his head back and laugh loudly. Already have no grass under the heavens. Why are there so many people? Before he could finish speaking, he saw a sea of hell soldiers in front of him, as well as the destructive light howling in his direction. He only had time to curse once. Then boom. Chapter 1030. Imagine this. If you were a mercenary with a hard life, you had no parents since you were young. You killed people and set fires for money for half of your life. In the end, you welcomed an extremely normal ending like all mercenaries, which was death by a nuclear explosion. Then, at this time, your brain suddenly went haywire and you had a problem. Suddenly, you felt that your life had no meaning and value. Suddenly, you wanted to start doing good deeds. Thus, an endless torment began, including but not limited to overbearing contracts, 80-year installment loans, overtime, firefighting, persecution, as well as office bullying for newcomers, and being a tool, and a tool of a tool. It could be foreseen that if you continued like this, one day, you would become a tool of a tool of a tool. Just like how you couldn't afford to offend your ancestors, you would welcome the beginning of the Matryoshka doll. And most likely, you would still be single at that time. This was the life of a tool that was despised. Every time you woke up from a long night, you would turn on your phone and look at the loan balance that didn't decrease. You would disconsolately light a cigarette and begin to reflect. If this was the price of finding your conscience, then wasn't this conscience a little too extravagant? But the bitter days would always come to an end. You firmly believed that as long as you continued on and didn't stop, one day, you would be able to usher in a bright future. The river flows east for 30 years, and the river flows west for 30 years. You used to ignore me, but now, you can't afford to be my match. After leaving the Huai family, you have no place to stand. What? You're the Dragon King. One day, you would be able to smile confidently, look disdainfully at the pendant of the heavenly state's cowherd on your thigh, and snort disdainfully. With such hope, you endured so many hardships and hardships. Finally, there was a glimmer of hope. You actually advanced first. Advanced. Looking forward to the stars and the moon, it was not easy to wait for this day. Finally, the daughter-in-law became a mother-in-law, and the slaves could turn over and sing praises. But before you could even look up to the sky and laugh 3 times, just as you opened your eyes, 100,000 people suddenly jumped out to mess with you. They even used cannons to attack. What happened to this world? At this moment, on the sun's ship, facing the bright light, Raymond's expression gradually became numb. Only a tear fell from the corner of his eye. It was so sad and sad. Then, there was no then. Being bombarded head-on by the Colossus of Destruction, which was powerful enough to destroy heavy fortifications in the War of the Worlds, would not end well, even if one thought about it with their heels. If it were anyone else, not even ashes would be left on the spot. However, when the intense light passed, Sun's ship was still shining brightly, while Raymond still maintained a sluggish look. Unscathed, only the rippling water around the ship had dissipated by more than half. The projection of the Netherworld River that lingered around Sun's ship was actually about to evaporate completely under the bombardment of this cannon. At this moment, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Raymond was stupefied for a long time. He touched his face and body and found that they were still intact. It was hard to believe. Not only that, but even the Colossus of Destruction, whose entire body was scorching red and emitting terrifying heat, was stunned. He was dumbfounded. Only Hades' expression gradually twisted. He squeezed out an angry voice from between his teeth. Sun's ship, legend had it that it was the miraculous crystal that carried God Ra and revolved around the present realm. It was one of the representative advancements of the Eternal Road. It could almost be seen as the reappearance of the Sun's ship, an authoritative relic that had solidified along with the gods. After abandoning many wonderful and terrifying attacks, what it gained was the stability and sturdiness of a container. To put it simply, because it was afraid of pain, it put all its points on defense. The most representative was the Netherworld River around the ship. It was not a simple projection or the reappearance of some mysterious power, but rather a part of the Netherworld River itself. The Netherworld River, which originated from the deepest part of hell, where the Egyptian gods had solidified and fallen, wrapped the Sun's ship in a thin stream of water from the warped space. If they could not break the defense of the Netherworld River, then they would not be able to touch Sun's ship itself. Continue the bombardment, don't stop. Joker ordered coldly. I want to see how long a newly advanced Sun ship can last. Right behind him, the secret instrument appeared again. Another Colossus of Destruction descended from the sky. Unlike the previous Colossus of Destruction that was huge and ferocious, this one was exceptionally stooped and slender, like a deformed monkey. Its entire body exuded countless sticky abyss sediments. The moment it descended, It continuously let out resounding screeches. The sound waves, which were filled with vicious pollution, gathered into a beam and reverberated on the battlefield, causing the netherworld river around Sun's ship to violently tremble. Damn, what's going on? Why are there so many people? Raymond wanted to cry, but had no tears. I just advanced a level. It's not to the extent of 100,000 people coming to mess with me, right? On the deck, Huaishur, who had just climbed up the ladder, patted him on the shoulder and comforted him earnestly. After all, the eternal road walks the path of killing. In the words of Dongxia, it's called violating the harmony of the heavens, so it's normal to provoke the wrath of the heavens. This is not your fault, so you don't have to feel bad. Raymond's heart warmed, and he instinctively nodded. Thank you. But after saying that, he realized that something was wrong. How did it become my fault? There's no time to explain. Hurry up and drive. Huaishur didn't wait for him to ask again. He raised his voice and urged, Run, run. In the distance, the tall and sturdy destruction colossus once again extracted the blood and origin substance from the surrounding allies. Its halo burned, and the giant eye in front of its chest brewed another layer of light. It was accumulating power and waiting to strike. If it really hit this time, it would really be over. Sun's ship suddenly shook, and the wind from the netherworld river stirred up, causing the enormous and imposing ship to speed forward without any warning. It only took an instant to go from being still to being as fast as lightning, but no one on the ship felt any sway. It was as if everything outside the ship was just an illusion. Even the giant eye's lock couldn't catch up to the majestic warship's speed. The blazing light brushed past the sails and flew to the end of hell. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. But before they could relax, they saw that following Hades' call, destruction colossus after destruction colossus descended from the crack in the sky one after another. Several giant eyes had already locked onto their position from different directions. And there was also a giant spider-like colossus that raised its abdomen and spat out a dark web that enveloped the entire hell. Even if the range was raised to the limit and couldn't maintain the mass, under the pull of countless silk threads, Sun's ship's speed actually slowed down a lot. And in the surroundings of the war chariot, countless spell masters and hell's monsters were also gathering power. Countless gloomy rays of light illuminated half of the sky. Everyone's heart turned cold. Lock on and fire. Hades pointed at the bow of Sun's ship with sinister, killing intent. That naked man is Huaishur. My goodness, it really is you. Raymond was furious. He stared at Huaishur, who still had an innocent face, wishing he could strangle him to death. What kind of outrageous thing did you do again? How would I know? Huaishur's expression changed as he urged in alarm. Where are the cannons? Where are your cannons? Use them to bombard him. I actually want to bombard him, but you have to pay up first. Raymond wanted to cry, but had no tears. He grabbed the rudder and spun with all his might. He drifted in the middle of the army and ran over a large number of hell's creatures. Immediately, flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Countless blood was pulled by the gravitational force and entered the waves of the river Styx. They became the source of Sun's ship's power and burned vigorously in the furnace. The speed increased by a step, but instead it highlighted the biggest weakness of Sun's ship. It didn't have any resistance. At best, it was just a hard shell that could run fast. Even if it was abundant, it could only strengthen the sturdiness of the chassis. It was still a blank slate. It didn't have anything. It was already lucky to have an air conditioner. You still want leather seats and hi-fi stereo? Keep on dreaming. In the Egyptian sourcebook, Sun's ship was an existence that carried the scorching sun and traveled between the present world and hell. It once carried the gods deep into the underworld and explored the source of hell. And the eternal road perfectly replicated this point. It was a vessel that carried miracles on the battlefield. The most important thing was to carry origin substance supplies and act as the core to provide aid and support to the surrounding allies. This included but was not limited to origin substance fuel, temporary maintenance, field hospitals, artillery positions, and when necessary, defensive fortifications. Dreams were always beautiful, but reality was always bleak. To achieve these functions, a large number of equipment was needed. Adam's armor, which greatly increased defense, Monta's equipment, which could simultaneously supply hundreds of high-tier sublimators, Isis's array, which could heal and maintain the lives of the severely injured, Seth's combat system, which could cover an extremely wide area with firepower, Thoth's radar, which could cover the entire infernal realm, and even Ra's engine, which could support all of this. Theoretically speaking, as long as he thought of a way, he could install the equipment that was used on Heavenly Prison Bastion, Horus, onto Sun's ship. But they had to pay more. Wanting to become stronger without spending money was simply a dream. But now, even if they wanted to spend money, there was no place to do so. They had already gone deep into hell, and even the closest supply station within 10 depths was 16 hells away. It was over. They couldn't get out at all. Raymond looked at the data given by the Red Dragon radar, as well as Hades' inescapable net that was beginning to shrink and the countless opponents in front of them. He couldn't help but want to hang himself. A total of 16 destruction colossi. It was likely that the war weapons of all the rulers in the dozens of depths nearby had been transferred here. This scale of combat power was enough to fight a tough battle in the War of the Worlds. He began to be curious from the bottom of his heart. How did Huaishur achieve the taunting effect of helping the entire realm attract firepower with his own strength? There was still a limit to escaping in a sorry state, no matter how fast they were. In the dark net, under the restraint of countless large groups of enemies at all costs, Sun's ship was finally surrounded and could no longer move. Then, under Heli's command, several colossi of destruction closed in from all directions, sealing off all paths of escape and completely devouring them. When the terrifying air waves swept over, only a tattered wreckage remained among the countless corpses. As for Huaishur on the deck, he had already turned into ashes the moment the bombardment arrived. Dead? On the war chariot, Hades couldn't help but lean forward and take a closer look. Even he himself couldn't believe that this guy, whom he regarded as a powerful opponent, had died under the encirclement and firepower of the army. But soon, he discovered a strange thing. Why was there no shadow of the ship's wreckage under the illumination of the flames? In that instant, following the collapse of the material simulacrum, the ship's wreckage quickly collapsed, turning into a pile of scrap metal. And just outside the encirclement of the army, in a corner of the thunder-white plains, the figure of Sun's ship appeared again. On the bow of the ship, Raymond laughed proudly. Silly, I can clone myself. The waves of the stick surged, tearing apart Gregory's illusion array. At the same time, after a long period of preparation, a route to a deeper hell was finally opened. Deep diving was about to begin. Chapter 1031. He did not expect such a strange change. The Sun's ship that had been shattered during the siege had actually turned into scrap metal after revealing its wreckage. Unknowingly, the shadow that had withdrawn from the bloody battlefield was the true body. For a long time, thanks to the internal information blockade of celestial genealogy, the outside world's understanding of the solar ship was too little. In addition, it completely hid itself behind the brilliance of the underworld's judgment machine. Every time it was dispatched, it was used as Osiris's logistics base to annihilate the enemy. There are not many survivors. In addition to the information disclosed by the Utopia itself, if outsiders wanted to get more information, they could only guess through their own experience and clues collected. Some forces had to be put on the surface to constitute a deterrent, such as Osiris's powerful strength and destructive power. And some things had to be hidden in the fog to be a threat, just like the solar ship that existed as a mobile battlefield command center. If one only relied on simple illusions to simulate it, it would not be able to hide from Hades' eyes and the observation of countless existences. In fact, until the solar ship was defeated, the power and miracles contained in it had never been fake. Then it was real, because whether it was in the description of the source code, myths, or reality, there had always been two real solar ships. One was called Manjet, and the other was called Myseketet. One sailed during the day, circling the present realm, and the other sailed late at night. The other circled the present realm, going deep into the underworld. Even if it was a blank slate, the Eternal Road Stigmata now had two faces and two completely different postures. Light drive and Styx mode. Under the state of light drive, Raymond could approach the solar ship that was said to carry the sun god Ra around the present realm without any restrictions. His speed could be further increased, his defense could be further improved, and at the same time, he could carry more equipment and provide more purple yuan, which could achieve a stronger effect in a head-on battle. The Shadow mode was a specialization in stealth combat. He could turn his real body into the shadow under the solar ship, and through a large amount of metal material, he could simulate the essence of the solar ship, thus achieving the effect of a clone. When necessary, he could abandon his doppelganger to avoid an attack that he could not resist and thus avoid being injured. More importantly, the Shadow mode had the function that Huaishur valued the most after his advancement. At any time, any place, without the help of any external conditions, he could achieve deep diving. With just 1 minute of preparation, he would be able to summon the river Styx and turn it into a sea route. With this, he would be able to travel between infernal realms and jump between depths. Open the portal. I'm running. This would be their team's greatest support and support in Infernal Realm. At the most crucial moment, Raymond decisively abandoned most of his body and the unnecessary structures in Sun's ship. After leaving behind the imitation doppelganger, Sun's ship escaped into the shadows and hid under the blood of the battlefield, escaping to the edge of white lightning plains in an instant. However, there was still no way out. With the entire depth sealed by Hades, the only way out was to summon the river Styx and enter the deeper depths of hell. In Gregory's illusion, the red dragon roared, but no sound could be heard. Only the faint waves of the river Styx could be heard, as if the sound waves were transmitted into the distance. In the cabin of Sun's ship, the sound of distant waves once again echoed from the silent iron coffin. That was Raymond's body in the past. Or rather, it was the true engine of Sun's ship. Amidst the surging echoes of the river Styx, the waves surrounding the ship gradually solidified and extended forward. In the end, the scenery on both sides of the river faintly appeared, as well as the deep darkness at the end of the river. At this moment, they seemed to have stopped at a certain shore and were waiting to set sail. They were truly entering the river Styx that was formed after the fall of the Egyptian gods. Only a strange existence like the river Styx could allow them to ignore the coordinates and direction and enter deep stealth without any external conditions or data. The instant the entrance to the river Styx appeared, all the illusions shattered. Gregory pathetically put on the ring again and was pulled back from the side of the ship by the captain. "Go, go, go," Raymond shouted. The red dragon unfolded its invisible wings, and a hurricane blew on the sails. On both sides of the ship, hundreds of oars frantically paddled. Sun's ship left the shore and sped away like an arrow, heading into the depths of the river Styx in the darkness, into the depths of hell. At the stern of the ship, Huaishur held onto the railing and raised a finger towards Hades. A silent farewell. Don't even think about it. On the war chariot, Hades roared, and the veins in his hand that was holding onto the scepter were exposed. Cursed chains appeared out of thin air and extended towards Sun's ship. The giant anchor at the top whistled through the air and actually broke the depth lock, embedding itself into the ship with a loud sound. The change in depth instantly stopped. It was actually stuck in the middle of the teleportation gate. The eyes of the destruction colossus that was closest flickered, and when they lit up again, they were filled with bone-deep hatred. It roared furiously and recklessly pounced towards Sun's ship. It was Hades. He forcibly seized the will of this destruction colossus, reached out to grab the chain, and pulled it with all his might, reaching out to grab the stern of Sun's ship. What the hell? Raymond's expression suddenly changed. Who the hell knew what that chain was? Under its pull, the golden ship was actually moving backwards. That was something that was specifically made for deep diving. In other words, Hades had even made plans and preparations for the possibility of his opponent entering deep stealth. In the middle of the rail, Forster subconsciously pulled out the blood-colored dagger on his belt, holding the blade upside down, and raised his hand to throw it. But then he saw Huaishir's back, and his hand that was slightly raised behind him. Thus, the throwing motion paused for a moment, and Huaishir had already pulled out Lord of the Flies from the ultimate. With a flick of his fingers, an ink-like bullet was loaded into the ejected magazine. He raised it solemnly and aimed at the furious giant in front of him. He smiled. After thinking about it, it's better for me to finish the job myself. Huaishir happily said goodbye. Goodbye, my dear friend. He said, parting is such a sweet sorrow. Please let me say good night to you until dawn. At that moment, Hades' expression suddenly changed, and he subconsciously let go of one hand and raised it in front of him. But it was already too late. The trigger was pulled, and with a low and soft sound, the ink-like bullet flew out of the barrel and silently passed through the palm of the destruction giant, as if it had passed through a layer of insignificant illusion and finally wedged into the furious face. Between the eyebrows, the giant's movements paused. Then there was a sharp pain. Huaishir. On the tank, Hades' body twitched violently, and wisps of black ink quickly seeped out of his facial features. And the face of the destruction giant began to rapidly distort, and began to rapidly dissolve and collapse from the roar. Great Si Ming's divinity was operating in it, bringing about pervasive erosion and assimilation. But this time, there were no more steps of contraction and condensation, but it exploded again at all costs. This was the most terrifying part of the cursed bullet cast by Great Si Ming's stigmata. It ignored all defenses. It suppressed all existences that were lower than its own pure divinity. But after a long period of refinement in the casting furnace, how many things could compare to the purity of this divinity? The destruction giant's raised arm could not block the bullet at all, because long before the bullet was blocked, the body in front of the bullet had already been assimilated into a part of the bullet under the power of shadow burial. At this moment, the destruction giant's movements came to an abrupt halt, as if it was frozen. However, a surging echo came from within his body. It was as if 10,000 caddies of water were surging and rapidly expanding. In the end, from the inside to the outside, endless pitch-black sludge gushed out from behind the cracked shell. Everything that came into contact with the mud began to dissolve rapidly. Even the chains began to show signs of rust as they silently broke apart. The giant collapsed and dissipated. What replaced it was a black tide that soared into the sky, sweeping across the wasteland. Wherever it passed, all large groups quickly disappeared without a trace, like oil in boiling water. Bodies, wills, and even weapons and armors were all integrated into the expanding sea of ink, never to be seen again. Under the assimilation of this bullet, it formed a terrifying wave that swept across the entire wasteland. In the end, it was diluted to the point where it could no longer be diluted. Only then did the faintly transparent tide disappear under the flash of the lightning. What remained were countless hell creatures that had not been completely assimilated by shadow burial, wriggling on the smooth, mirror-like ground. It looked like a half-dissolved handicraft candle. It was so tragic that it was unrecognizable. The waves of the Styx River had disappeared without a trace, and only the ravines of the river remained on the ground. In the silence, only the wails of the aberrated creatures could be heard. No one dared to speak. For a long time, only on the chariot, a hoarse command sounded. Sound the drum of evil, summon the dark clouds of the abyss, and use the storm to devour everything. Hades said they can't go far, but the deep storm will also interfere with us. Behind him, the old priest was in a daze, his expression twitching. I've said it. Hades slowly turned his head and repeated softly, sound the drum of evil. On that pale face, there was no longer any concealment of inhuman ferocity and viciousness. After the ink between the delicious nose faded away, the pair of eyes were still covered in darkness. Viscous darkness continuously flowed out from the pair of empty eye sockets, as if they were tears. Tears of the damned. In the dead silence, the priest nodded stiffly, not daring to look again. Hades, on the other hand, covered his eyes, the veins on the back of his hand bulging. Feeling the pain that went deep into his bones, he suddenly let out a hoarse roar. A roar. The roar echoed in hell, never ending. That pair of eyes could no longer see anything. Before he cut off the connection with the all-destroying giant, Great Si Ming's solidifying divinity had eroded his face along the connection, cruelly taking away his eyes. Forever, it entangled his body, becoming an aberration that could not be removed from his soul. No matter what method was used to repair it, even suicide or rebirth, it could not be removed. This eternal pain and darkness was Huaishi's final gift. Since he could not bear to say goodbye, then never see him again. However, after breaking through the limit of depth and truly coming into contact with it, the malevolence hidden in the eternal coldness and darkness became even stronger. It was unsettling. At this moment, the sun ship was following the waves of the Nether River, advancing quietly in the darkness. The countless hells were like illusions of nothingness, emitting weak and dim light. Behind them was the lightning white plains, which was already covered in cracks. Perhaps not long after, under the gravity of other hells, it would fall apart and merge into other barren worlds. Amidst the endless dim stars, the present realm was emitting flames that resembled the sun. Under the cover of the present realm's defensive line, it was shining brightly. It was like the only dazzling light in this abyss. Countless hells were attracted to it. Under the imperceptible push of the deep tide, a large number of hells were moving closer to the present realm, embedding with each other, forming one huge domain after another. And around the present realm, thick shadows were already shrouded. And in the darkness of this abyss, between the countless hells, there was a faint rainbow light entwined. Like a rainbow bridge, it connected the various hells together. That was the masterpiece of the Golden Dawn, the stairway to hell. It was precisely because of its existence that many rulers could send out a huge advance army before their own domains floated up, speeding up the prelude to the War of Worlds. In the sun ship's view, countless aurora-like rainbow lights were fluctuating like a bloodline. What flowed among them were pitch-black shadows. Countless hellish hordes were riding on the pulse of the abyss and heading towards the present realm. As far as the eye could see, in the stairway to hell that faintly covered more than half of the abyss, it was impossible to count how many hells there were. Numbers have no meaning in hell. Forster explained, some leaders of large groups, as long as there is enough environment, can easily catalyze thousands of children, just like cannon fodder. As long as there is enough depth and calamity to devour, their numbers are endless. Endless enemies, it sounds really despairing. Huaishir sighed softly. It's precisely because of this that there is fighting spirit, isn't it? Forster smiled. If we really let these guys destroy the present realm, I'm afraid we can only go to the stinky gutters of hell to surf. Regardless of the Command Bureau's reserves and plans, if all the outposts can be reactivated, then the initiative of the war will be in our hands. At that time, no matter how many enemies there are under the 3 major blockades, it will be meaningless. I just hope it will be smooth sailing. Huaishir patted the sun ship that had just advanced and was already in tatters, and sighed helplessly. Raymond, who was working overtime at the side, heard this and wanted to beat this bastard to death with a wrench. You better shut your crow's mouth. Unfortunately, it was too late. Just as Huaishir's voice fell, in the deathly silent abyss, a strange sound faintly sounded. It was like the beating of a drum. The thunder-white plains was beating like a heart, ignoring the rapidly expanding cracks on its body, transmitting this curse-like drum sound to the deepest part of the abyss. What is that? Raymond was stunned. I don't know. Huaishir frowned and urged. But we have to hurry. Find a place to stop as soon as possible. I have a bad premonition, he said. His intuition of death was awakened. It followed behind him like a shadow, blowing cold air on his neck as it grinned maliciously. Even if it was an illusory reason like intuition, Everyone's expression became solemn. Everyone present had experienced more than once how accurate Sher's intuition of danger was. It was so accurate that there was no reason. Everything that could cause death would trigger his reaction. Then, that was to say, the drum's sound was directed at them. The golden ship sped up and sailed deeper into the depths. After crossing 2 depths, it hurriedly approached a hell shrouded in dust and sand. But before that, what they saw was a huge shadow rapidly rising from the deepest part of the abyss. It was like a cloud layer emitting a faint light. Dozens of huge silhouettes slowly wriggled in it, spitting out deeply precipitated ink. They shuttled through the void of the abyss, like giant beasts wandering in space. Countless tentacles extended from the strange cloud layer. Under the call of the drum sound, the hunters sleeping between hell were awakened, stirring up the deep tide. Wherever they passed, even the neon lights connecting hell were broken. Countless large groups scattered in the void of the abyss and were quickly swept into the dark clouds by the tentacles. Those strange monsters that looked like deep-sea creatures opened their mouths and unrestrainedly ate everything that could be eaten. In the end, countless eyes looked toward the sun ship. They were the countless shadows that roamed the abyss. When they gathered together, they were enough to devour the entire infernal realm. The biggest threat in all deep dives. Do you have to be so accurate? Raymond gritted his teeth and turned the ship without caring about anything, adjusting the course. The winding sticks rapidly changed its course, avoiding their sight. However, in this empty abyss, there was no way for them to escape. The closest destination was still a depth away. Just drive the ship. I'll think of a way. Sher took out Beelzebub and silently counted the bullets. But there were too many monsters in the dark clouds. A large group of strange giant beasts had already targeted them. However, it was in this abyss of nothingness. If there was no other way, they could only try again. Just as they were prepared, Sher suddenly felt a sharp pain in his ears. It was not only him. At this moment, on the sun ship and even in the dark clouds not far away, they were swallowed by a sudden high-pitched sound. The strange noise was mixed with a large number of unbearable sharp sounds. They actually broke through the vacuum barrier in the abyss and drilled into their eardrums, then reverberated through their nerves and into their souls. It caused their vision to turn black. They could not tell what kind of sound it was, but the resentment and hunger that filled it made their hair stand on end. Shrouded in the strange noise, the sticks rippled and showed signs of dissipating. It was the depth. The depth was changing drastically. Raymond could no longer control his ship's rudder. A turbulent flow suddenly appeared in the deep tide, causing countless hells that were rising steadily to shake like soap bubbles. Suddenly, a terrifying wave of energy surged, like monstrous waves on the surface of the sea. The golden ship was like a withered leaf, wrapped in the undercurrent and could no longer control its course. It was not only them. Even the group of deep wanderers who were originally chasing after them, and even the sedimentary clouds where they were, began to tremble violently, because just behind them, an even larger shadow slowly emerged. They could not spy on its outline at all, because everything was wrapped in darkness that was so dense that nothing could be seen. It was even darker and more ferocious than the abyss. It was as if a behemoth was attracted by food. It quickly floated up. In an instant, the endless depths seemed to have been crossed by the darkness. The ferocious shadow was close at hand, and the invisible mouth opened. Swallowing, everything disappeared into the deathly silence and darkness. Whether it was the deep behemoths attracted by the drum of evil or the dark clouds where they were, they all disappeared without a trace at this moment. As for the tiny golden ship, it was as if it was scraps that leaked out from the gaps between its teeth. It narrowly avoided this terrifying devouring, just a hair's breadth away. In the darkness, there seemed to be a cold gaze looking down at them for a moment, making everyone's hair stand on end and freeze on the spot. But soon, the gaze was retracted without interest. It seemed to despise the prey for being too small. It was too indifferent. The darkness disappeared into the abyss again. What on earth is that? on the swaying golden ship, Huaisher was still stiff and sweating profusely. Who knows? Raymond wanted to cry, but had no tears. He shouted in the radar alarm, "Everyone, get into the cabin quickly. A storm is coming." It was only now that the undercurrent stirred up by the behemoth had finally covered everything. All the hells within several depths were shrouded in violent changes, shrouded in the debris and broken hell suspended in the abyss. They were on the verge of collapse. Everything was immersed in this sudden destruction. The storm drowned everything. Just as the world was spinning, the golden ship was like a paper boat. It was involuntarily sucked into it and flew deeper into the abyss. Why sure? Just before it was completely out of control, Raymond turned back and shouted hoarsely, "I have something to say to you." "What's the matter?" At the door of the cabin, Huaisher grabbed the rope tightly and turned back. At this last moment, Raymond hugged the rudder, took a deep breath, and widened his eyes. If he didn't say something now, he might never have the chance. Just like this, with all his strength, he issued a final complaint. "Put on some King clothes." Chapter 1033. Late at night, the London border. The command center of the central decision-making room was brightly lit, and every tired face looked serious and dignified. The ear-piercing alarm still seemed to echo in their ears, and they could not help but be on tenterhooks as they stared nervously at the screen, waiting for the results. The participants were still the same group of participants. After all, the high-tier ascendants had not slept or rested for weeks, and at most they would yawn. They had not dozed off at all. The other ordinary members who had worked overtime until they died were basically dragged out of their beds by the alarm. They sat in their seats with disheveled hair and dirty faces, looking at each other, especially when they saw their natural enemy, Tyr, who had just walked out of the side door. Their nerves became more and more tense. Their natural enemy had appeared at this time. It made people feel that something was amiss. What happened? Someone asked uneasily. Hell has finally launched an attack? Which ruler wants to enter the border? Or the elemental destruction? And the people waiting here were also confused. Before the Bronze Eyes detection report, no one dared to say so easily. But the border defense line was still calm, like stagnant water, without any fluctuations. There was not even any friction or fire. So why did the security alarm suddenly sound? When the Bronze Eyes preliminary report was sent over, everyone looked at each other in dismay. Earthquake. To be precise, it was a deep tremor. Then, there was a terrible storm that swept through the entire Depth 10, causing the vanguard army of the rulers to suffer unexpected losses. Furthermore, due to the convergence of the infernal tides and the connection of the Hell Stairway, the earthquakes and storms that were originally limited to one infernal realm had spread several times over, bringing unexpected attacks and heavy losses to dozens of infernal realms. Even the Hell Stairway was interrupted. One could foresee Golden Dawn's blood pressure now exploding and the terrible workload that followed. And the tragic losses of many rulers, it was not bad news. On the contrary, the news was so good that no one dared to believe it. Even the Bronze Eye did not dare to jump to conclusions after repeated investigations. What the hell? It was like two armies facing off, and suddenly seeing a big fireball fall from the sky and smash into the enemy's nest. For a moment, a dreamy feeling emerged in everyone's hearts. There were even more people who gritted their teeth and injected themselves with the vitality potion, suspecting that they were still asleep. For some of the lineages, messengers had been sent out to verify the information themselves, or they had used exploratory lenses to observe in detail. Just as everyone was talking and communicating in low voices, some sharp-eyed people saw Jaeger quietly walking in from the side door. The old man obviously hadn't had time to change his clothes. He was still wearing slippers. When Xian Yao saw him sitting next to Russell, he raised his brows slightly and seemed to have understood something. Russell, on the other hand, was still playing with his phone. He didn't realize it. Jaeger was expressionless. "This old thing is already acting," he coughed twice in a low voice. When Russell finally looked up, he asked in a low voice, "Celestial genealogy. Does your ivory tower—" "No." Huaisher have any other missions? No, what's wrong? Russell seemed to be puzzled and asked. For a moment, Jaeger's expression became extremely strange. He stared intently at Russell. Russell also looked at him, full of doubts. What's wrong? Did something happen to him? No, he's fine. Jaeger was silent for a moment and said in a low voice, but he blew up the thunder white plains. In the short silence, neither of them spoke, but their eyes were full of confusion and countless question marks. The expression on their faces changed, and every wrinkle on their faces was written with the words, "Are you King kidding me?" One suspected that he knew, the other suspected that he knew. The doll was hooked. It blew up? After a long time, Russell finally broke the cycle of the doll and confirmed it again. Yes, it blew up. Jaeger nodded and said with great certainty. To put it simply, he made a big bomb and blew up half of hell into the sky. Together with an entire hell settlement, more than 6 large groups, and 4 subsequent legions. What the hell? The gazes on them became more and more strange. They were almost doubting their ears. That's ridiculous. Luo Su interrupted him without hesitation and corrected him sternly. Our school will never accept the accusation of a terrorist attack. Mr. Huaisher has always been our model employee. He has an excellent character and is kind to others. After a moment of confusion, the old man instinctively began to draw a line between them. Don't talk nonsense. That's enough, Mr. Russell. We're not here to hold you accountable. Jaeger sighed and pushed the document in his hand directly. Since you've spoken, you must have conclusive evidence. This is the information that has just been sent over. Harper in the present realm has detected an extraterrestrial meteor impact that caused an explosion, and the visual intensity has reached 1/16. At the same time, our probe in hell has detected a large tremor at depth 10, and there are videos and photos of Huaisher taken at the scene. Conservatively speaking, after destroying 1 hell settlement, he annihilated at least 3 hell's legions and used some unknown method to kill a group of extremely dangerous wanderers from the depths of hell, triggering a storm that affected 3 depths and dozens of hells. Thus, it greatly delayed the gathering speed of hell's advance forces, and the turbulence of the deep tide interfered with the rise of some rulers, which bought us at least a week or more. Silence. In the long silence, Russell's expression was full of suspicion. He looked at Jaeger in front of him. Which one of us is Loki? But he did not smell any lies from the beginning to the end. Besides, Jaeger did not have to come over to tease him at this juncture. But the problem was, he really did not know anything. How could he have thought that Huaisher had just left the school a few days ago, and he had already done such a big job? If he had been prepared in advance, why would he be sitting here in a daze? He would have doubled the King leverage and swindled another wave of investment, and then he would have started gambling again. If everything went smoothly, he might have even found a spendthrift to take over the business by now. No matter what time it was, this was a great victory worthy of a special medal. It had to be known that for something like a defensive line, if it could be repaired, it would be effective. But if he wanted to repair it, he had to put in a bit of effort. Time. Time was always the key, and there was never enough. With this week's time, he could be more confident. In particular, he could adjust the rotation of the protectors in each area and ensure that enough people could be deployed at critical times. In normal situations, there was no lack of firepower and support in the area covered by the 3 major blockades. But if a ruler was mobilized, there would need to be a level 5 ascendant, and some of the stronger ones might even need to be adjusted by the corners and use the relics of authority to repel or kill them. Now, that there was an extra week out of thin air, it was not only the decision-making room that breathed a sigh of relief, but the people on the front lines who were repeatedly jumping on the edge of death wanted nothing more than to set up a memorial tablet for Huaisher and burn incense every day. They only hoped that Mr. Huaisher would do more work in hell and perform more. Only Russell felt a little heartache for a moment. He had once had a chance to cheat money in front of him, and he actually did not cherish it. Since that's the case, can we discuss the distribution of the correction value? Russell's eyes didn't even finish rolling before he nimbly raised a large knife. We can't let the hero bleed and cry, right? You just said that you won't admit it. What are you talking about? Huaishir is the mainstay of our celestial genealogy. He is reliable, has high morals, and has a kind heart. What he likes the most is to help old grannies cross the road. Moreover, this is a mission from the Directorate of Defense. You can't just give him verbal praise and let it go, right? Before this guy could get more and more ridiculous, Jaeger raised his hand and interrupted him. All right, stop talking. Apart from the originally promised distortion, the correction value needed for Huaishir's advancement will be taken care of by the Directorate of Defense, okay? Rather than let him ask for a sky-high price, it was better to lay out the conditions himself. Otherwise, this old bastard would definitely bite the bullet and not let it go. This time, Russell did not press the attack. Instead, he revealed a doubtful expression. Are you sure? Of course. As the Director General, I still keep my word for the time being. Jaeger nodded, not minding. Although correction value was precious, it should be used on the cutting edge. Moreover, he was a rank 3 sublimator advancing to rank 4. How much correction value could he burn? At most, he could just double it. But for some reason, Russell's gaze made his hair stand on end. It was like looking at the big fat pig at the entrance of the village during the new year. What are you laughing at? Jaeger was puzzled. No, it's nothing. Russell gave a simple and honest smile. Good things, all good things. Jaeger was silent for a long time. He had a feeling that the old man was up to something, but he could not figure it out. So he continued, However, I have one last question. Please speak, please speak. The Director General was silent for a moment. Then he coughed and sighed. I understand. Celestial Genealogy's mission is difficult, and it's also one of the most dangerous of all the outpost projects. Huaishir's team will have to bear the highest risk. Not at all, not at all. It's all about contributing to the current situation. What's the difference between high and low? Russell replied reservedly. This is all part of Celestial Genealogy's work. Don't mind it. But look at the border trade agreement I mentioned a few days ago. Let's talk about that another time. Jaeger resisted the urge to cough and pulled the topic back with difficulty. In short, Celestial Genealogy can stand up at this time and set an example for everyone. The decision-making room is also very pleased. They also want to set an example, but he rubbed his eyebrows, took out a photo from the document, and placed it in front of Russell. He asked curiously, why isn't he wearing any clothes? In the photo, the man stood on the scorched earth with his hands on his hips. He stood magnanimously against the wind, against the ruins of destruction. He looked indescribably handsome, but for some reason, he was not wearing any clothes. He was completely naked. Russell's expression stiffened for a moment, but he quickly calmed down and replied calmly, maybe it's because it's hot. Huh. The corner of Jaeger's eyes twitched. Well, it's hell. It's reasonable for it to be a little hot. Besides, young people always have some unknown fetishes. It's normal for them to lose their composure occasionally. It's not strange. As elders, we have to be tolerant and guide them. Luo Su said earnestly, Look, as a mountain ghost, he is expressing his disappointment and anger at the illegal discharge of waste water and waste in the present realm. At the same time, he's wearing less clothes. He's setting an example to remind everyone to reduce carbon emissions and protect nature and the ecological environment. For a moment, Jaeger felt that it seemed to make sense. He couldn't help but nod. But before he could react, he heard a click. The flashes of the camera flashed. Russell's hand had quietly stuffed the phone back into his pocket, as if nothing had happened. Jaeger was speechless. Talking was actually a physical task, especially when the subject was an old bastard like Russell. When Jaeger was about to leave, he was already starting to feel dizzy. Fortunately, he remained vigilant until the end and didn't let this guy take anything away from him. He was physically and mentally exhausted. But before he could take 2 steps, a staff member came up to him happily, giving him an ominous feeling. Mr. Jaeger, Mr. Jaeger. The staff member showed the tablet and the renderings in his hand. Our publicity picture is ready. According to your instructions, we'll focus on the news and promote it throughout the country. Take a look. Is there anything else that needs to be changed? On the flat reality, between the passionate words, there was a full-body portrait of a man standing in hell. He had bronze-colored skin, long hair that fluttered in the wind, and an imposing demeanor. He was as imposing as a hero in a classical oil painting. At the same time, he was also naked. Suddenly, Jaeger had a hallucination of a cerebral hemorrhage, and his vision turned black. "How is it? Isn't it perfect?" the staff member said excitedly. "I haven't seen such a beautiful news picture for many years. Look at the light and shadow. Look at the lines. It's simply impeccable." Facing the tablet that was about to hit his face, Jaeger subconsciously stepped back a little. His expression was wrinkled, and he wanted to say something but stopped. He couldn't say a word. Only his two hands were gesturing blankly, and he opened his mouth several times. Finally, he said tiredly, "I understand the spirit of you journalists to seek truth, but sometimes you at least draw him a pair of underpants, okay? What about the style?" The staff member asked, "Do you have any requirement for the style? Look, is this dark purple triangle better? Or is the bright red boxer style better? Or should we be bolder? Or is it more suitable for his personal style? Can't you King change the picture?" Jaeger wanted to say a few more words, but for the sake of his blood pressure and lifespan, he didn't want to look at it anymore. He could only numbly cover his face. You could do whatever you want, so the matter was settled. 20 minutes later, in the area covered by the present, the border, the 7 continents, the 8 oceans, the astronomical union, the 5 pillars, and hundreds of independent border city-states, crisp notifications sounded one after another. A brand new pop-up window for tomorrow's news was pushed to every user's mobile phone screen. It illuminated the dazed faces one after another. The short and impassioned text described the beginning and end of the surprise attack behind the enemy's back, and unreservedly praised the hero's achievements. And the ultra-high-definition full-body photo at the front showed every reader the unruly appearance of the person involved. Especially the hot style, bold lines, and childlike patterns and colors. It aroused the hearts of countless girls and made them curious. And half an hour later, a brand new entry appeared on today's hot search. Countless people were waiting for the answer in confusion and anxiety. What's that pink pig head? Chapter 1034. Thanks to the leader of the best pumpkin porridge. Depth 14. Illusory quagmire 15 minutes to the explosion of the white thunder plains, and half an hour to the arrival of the deep storm. Amidst the rancid smell, the endless swamp stretched as far as the eye could see. Everything was shrouded in a white mist. In the deepest part of the mist, it was dark. From time to time, one could see a huge shadow slowly walking past, but no sound could be heard. The only sound that could be heard was the sticky sound of the mud beneath the platform moving about. Just above the bottomless quagmire, a dozen pieces of wood were casually pieced together to form a crude platform. Like a sampan, it slowly floated in the quagmire. No one knew where it went. Next to the gray tent, a bonfire was burning in an iron bucket, roasting pieces of colorful mushrooms. As the oil seeped out, the mushrooms opened their small mouths and made a sharp sound on the iron net. The man with the horse mask grabbed a handful of pepper and sprinkled it, then smeared the sauce on the mushrooms until the cursed mushrooms stopped wailing and emitted a tempting fragrance. To be honest, although why sure is wicked, this recipe is pretty good. Tony grabbed a skewer, took 2 bites, and sighed. Finally, I don't have to eat compressed dry food. His companion sighed and also grabbed a bunch of mushrooms. Although that's true, your recipe is completely wrong. More than half of the mushrooms you grow are poisonous. Lucian, you don't understand. Isn't this just adding a little hellish flavor? It's more exciting when it's poisonous. Tony's mouth was full of oil as he looked at his last companion in the tent. Do you want some? You're cooking? Forget it. The shackled companion sneered and did not bother to pay attention to him. Tony shrugged and didn't care. Instead, he tilted his head and looked at the mist in the distance. In the thin mist, countless strange illusions kept appearing, luring the explorers to go deeper, until they couldn't extricate themselves and turned into bones in the mud, accompanied by countless corpses. Wonderful, really wonderful. Tony exclaimed in surprise. This is much more wonderful than the TV series. This twist is really amazing. Lucian shook his head helplessly. Encountering a fellow who used poisonous mushrooms to add flavor and watched cursed illusions as if they were a soap opera was a huge blow to a proper Hellblazer. After finishing the poisonous mushrooms, Tony lifted his sleeve and wiped the oil on the horse's face. He turned around and asked, "What time is it?" Lucian looked at his watch. "It's 3:15 in the morning. You've been waiting for 2 days, right? Why aren't you coming?" Tony scratched his head. Could it be that the guy was unlucky and fell into the ruler's home? Lucian wanted to ask what the F*** were you talking about, but after thinking about it carefully, he had to admit, yes, with Huaishir's luck, it's possible as the guides arranged by the Astronomical Society in Hell, they had been waiting here for 3 days. According to the established route, Huaishir was supposed to meet up with them a day ago. Then, they would work together until they reached the lowest level of the deep zone, which was about 40 meters deep. Then, they would part ways. But now, it seemed that the plan had gone wrong from the very beginning. Huaishir's team was late by a day. Anything could happen in Hell. They might have taken a wrong path or gotten into an accident, but it was also possible that they were already dead. Are we still waiting? Tony asked. Let's wait for another day, Lucian said. We have our own mission. If he's not here by then, we'll have to set off. Then let's wait for another day. Tony turned around and looked at the tent. What do you think, General? Is there need to care about the opinion of a prisoner? In the shackles, the general glanced at him indifferently. Even if you don't agree, isn't it just adding to the humiliation? To be honest, you become much easier to talk to after putting on the cuffs. I really don't want to take this thing. Tony sighed. You better not. The general's lips curled up slightly. I can't guarantee what I'll do. Don't worry, I'm fast. Tony opened his pocket and continued to place fresh mushrooms on it. He began to roast them. But before the second time, the fingers of Lucian, who was resting with his eyes lowered, suddenly trembled slightly. On his wrist, among the string of beads of various colors, a haze suddenly appeared. He was silent for a moment and suddenly said, We should go. We're not waiting. We're not waiting. Lucian got up and began to pack his things. We're going to set off. Hurry up. Otherwise, there might be an accident. Tony did not insist on asking the reason for Lucian's judgment. On the contrary, in Hell exploration, the last thing they needed was a reason. What they needed the most was trust. Trust in someone who could bear the trust. In terms of Hell exploration, Tony knew that 10,000 of him could not compare to Lucian's casual glance. Then, there was nothing to say. If he said to go, then go. What if Huaishir comes later? If they can't see us, they'll know that we've set off. Lucian's movements did not stop. He's not someone who will stay in the same place and wait. Besides, he has his own mission. Should we find a confidential box and leave the route map behind? No matter how confidential the box is, there's still the possibility of others opening it. Leaving it behind is leaving them with hidden dangers. I've already sent them the document before the mission began. Lucian carried his backpack. We have to ensure the safety of both parties. Most importantly, we have to prioritize the completion of both parties' missions. Other than that, nothing else is important. Then let's go. Tony whistled. Thus, the mud surged, and the behemoth sleeping under the mud slowly rose. The giant snake opened its mouth and swallowed the 3 of them into its stomach. Soon, it passed through a rainbow door and disappeared. What was left in place was only the sizzling mushroom slices. 3 minutes later, a huge shadow passed through this eternal swamp. Wherever it passed, everything turned to dust in the invisible fire. 4 minutes later, the thunder-white plains exploded. 9 minutes later, a deep storm struck. 12 minutes later, the sun ship officially crashed and fell into the abyss. 25 minutes later, depth 37, rusty pagoda forest. Under the eternal haze of the sky, countless abandoned and broken towers stretched out like fingers towards the sky where there was no light. Countless hellish creatures were scattered under those towers, digging up the relics of the past and selling them in all directions. And in the solemn hall of a huge settlement, under the witness of dozens of elders, a shocked voice rang out. Divorce? The rickety rat man standing below with his head held high questioned in a trembling voice. Chief, what do you mean? That's right. On the throne, the huge rat man chief glanced at him. Give up, Baldy. You're a piece of trash. After so many years, you're still a level 3 anointed one. How can you be worthy of my daughter? I advise you to recognize reality as soon as possible. Preposterous. The rickety rat man Baldy's eyes were burning red. 30 years in the West, 30 years in the East. Chief Big Tooth, don't bully the young. Big Tooth heard this and immediately looked up to the sky and laughed. Huh, a piece of trash actually dares to spout such nonsense. He waved his hand. Men, take him down and slap him. In an instant, 2 burly rat men came out of the crowd and pressed Baldy to the ground to slap him. Big Teeth was admiring its sorry state from above. He looked up to the sky and laughed. How can a piece of trash like you be worthy of my daughter? She's already with the young master of the dragon scale settlement next door. She even has a litter of cubs. I advise you to be sensible and hand over your father's relics. I can still let you eat in the future. Otherwise, don't blame me for being heartless. Under the suppression, Baldy roared in grief and anger, especially when he heard that his beloved Ratman had hooked up with the kobold next door and even had cubs. His eyes instantly turned red. With a roar, he actually stood up under the suppression of the 2 burly men. Okay. Since you're already heartless, don't blame me for being heartless. With a wave of his hand, Baldy brazenly crushed the 2 burly rat men to death and threw them at Big Tooth's feet. He raised his head and said, I don't want to stay in this Big Tooth settlement. You're rebelling. Big Tooth yelled angrily and crushed the armrest. If you leave Big Tooth settlement, there will be no place for you in the rusty pagoda forest. Men, take him down. Take him down. In an instant, a number of elders behind Big Tooth made their moves. However, even the rarely seen wearers couldn't take down a mere Baldy. In a few short exchanges, they were all killed. Big Tooth's dark green eyes suddenly shot out a ray of light. However, his trump card was completely ineffective. Instead, it was bounced off by the simple necklace on Baldy's neck. Leader Big Tooth, you have eyes but can't see. Today, I'll show you my true strength. Baldy leapt into the air. Dark origin substance fluctuations tore through the ceiling. His voice echoed throughout the settlement. I've swallowed a poisonous stone. My life is in my hands, not the heavens. Baldy raised his hands high. A fierce light burst forth from his palms like a small sun, illuminating Big Tooth's shocked face. Seeing those fellows who used to ride roughshod over him in the past turn pale with fright now made him feel even more comfortable. Old Poison, help me. Following his call, the necklace in front of his chest lit up with a strange light, causing the blazing mass in his hand to expand. All of a sudden, there was a sudden explosion. A strong wind pressure descended from the sky. The unbelievable power caused Big Tooth's knees to tremble. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed frantically, begging for mercy. Huh, now you're scared? Baldy laughed. You're not the only one who's scared. When I get serious, even I'm scared. Thinking back to the countless secret exercises in the past, he had never felt such power and strength. Could it be that after breaking the shackles and clearing his mind, his strength had increased greatly? Instantly, he became even more delighted. At that moment, he felt that his power was surging endlessly. The terrifying light and momentum had already enveloped the entire Great Tooth settlement. In fact, even the sky was shattered by it. Old Poison, you were right. I really am a genius that only appears once every 10,000 years. However, this time, the pendant in front of his chest only trembled and did not make a sound. This made him puzzled. Old Poison, why aren't you saying anything? Are you also shocked by my talent? I'm shocked your ass. In the pendant, the evil creature that was sealed let out a terrified scream. It was almost crying. Something is falling. Run. At that moment, the dim light in Baldy's hand disappeared without a trace like a bubble. However, the light in the sky became more and more intense and was getting closer and closer. Thunder rumbled. The light of the scorching sun burst forth. After crashing through the crack in the sky, it whistled toward the ground. Wherever it passed, layers of air waves swept out, constantly setting off thunderous sounds. When Baldy turned around in shock, he saw the ferocious outline of the dazzling sun. It rushed toward him. He fell into a daze. What's this boom? The light exploded. Baldy, Big Tooth, dozens of elders, the rat men, and the litter of cubs that Big Tooth's daughter had just given birth to, as well as the entire Big Tooth settlement. At this moment, they welcomed the same destruction. The ground wailed, and terrifying air waves spread out. In the continuous tremors, dozens of broken towers were razed to the ground and completely disappeared without a trace. Countless huts were ravaged by the air waves. Inch by inch, they shattered and flew in all directions. It was not until a long time later that the terrifying aftershocks slowly stopped. On the ground, there was no longer any Big Tooth settlement. Only the huge ship that fell from the sky was half buried in the ruins, shining brightly. Chapter 1035. The violent tremors spread through the entire rusty pagoda forest in just half a minute. Countless broken pagoda forests shook, but there was no reaction. In this remote infernal realm, there were no longer any natives. They were all infernal realm settlements that had migrated here from other depths. Dozens of settlements occupied areas rich in resources and attacked each other, just like in many other infernal realms. Until now, no true ruler had been born. It was only because of the abundance of water that they had a little bit of life. Once the water that fell from the clouds and the pagoda forest disappeared, they would most likely set off again and go to other places. This was Infernal Realm. The moment the blazing sun fell, it attracted countless gazes. In just half an hour, the ruins of the Big Tooth tribe were filled with people. The legions from the various settlements had already sealed off the inside and outside. Treasure. The leader of the Dragonscale settlement surrounded the remains of Sun's ship and excitedly licked his lips. His saliva was almost dripping down. Although I don't know what this is, it must be a treasure. Not long after, his heart had been stolen by the shiny object in front of him. Other than that, there was no joy or sorrow. As for the in-law that had just been smashed to death, who was that? Thanks to the geographical advantage of the Dragonscale settlement, he was the first to arrive. At the same time, he brought the most people. The Evergreen settlement's reaction was a bit slower. When they arrived, it was already too late. As for the rest, they did not even squeeze in. Seeing the dozens of huge steel chariots that were still emitting thick smoke and hundreds of kobolds armed to the teeth, they wisely chose to retreat. Only the leader of the Evergreen settlement was still standing in front of Sun's ship's remains, looking up in a daze, until he sensed the cold gazes of the Dragonscale settlement's group leaders. The leader of the Evergreen settlement raised his eyes and coldly asked, "Such a big thing. Don't tell me Sir Greyblade wants to take it for himself?" Behind him, a large group of cavalry mounted the huge lizards, the spears in their hands reflecting a cold light. Greyblade was not to be outdone. The steel chariot behind him spewed out thick smoke, and he turned the cannons to aim at his neighbors. First come, first serve, that's what it means. What's wrong? Do you have any objections? The gray-robed female, Serpent Man, didn't say anything, but the cold light in her vertical eyes became even colder. But soon, when she inadvertently swept her gaze over the cracked Sun ship, she was able to distinguish a blurry mark, the emblem of a pure white tower. Her pupils shrank slightly as she subconsciously took a step back. No, the elder's complexion suddenly changed. I have no objections. As she spoke, she raised her hand and signaled her subordinates behind her to put down their weapons and prepare to retreat. For a time, the tense atmosphere began to dissipate. Even though the subordinates did not understand the orders of the revered elder, they still chose to obey. They covered the revered elder and slowly retreated. The formation of more than 60 cavalrymen was strict and did not waver. That's right. Seeing his opponent running away with his tail between his legs, Greyblade suddenly laughed proudly. You people are just wretched and ill-fated. You don't have enough luck and wisdom. How could you be qualified to obtain such a treasure? Min, drag it back. He stroked the golden hull, almost drooling. He recalled the ancient books passed down from the modern realm in the settlement, and suddenly found a very appropriate metaphor. This is called, Heaven's treasure belongs to those who are virtuous. In fact, I think so too. Suddenly, a voice of agreement sounded, making Patriarch Grey Blade nod proudly. But then, he saw the golden hull in front of him suddenly split open. Endless darkness was revealed. A hand slowly stretched out from the darkness, casually pressed on his head, and pinched his head. Then, a pale face emerged from the darkness, looking down at his sluggish appearance. It seemed to be smiling. But the problem is, Huaisher asked, "Who is the treasure?" Grey Blade's eyes widened, and he subconsciously drew his sword. In an instant, the arm and the face were cut into pieces. But then he saw that from the broken flesh and blood, countless sticky tentacles slowly stretched out and entangled his body. The terrifying shadow from the abyss opened its big mouth in the darkness, grinned and grinned. That cold and cruel look made the kobold roar in horror. But countless tentacles stretched out from the darkness, entangled his body little by little, sank into his mouth, nose, and brain little by little. In the end, the cruel essence from hell poured into his soul from the inside out. Pain, despair, anger, sadness, and resentment. In the endless tide of darkness, he struggled in horror, shouted, and screamed in despair, but no one heard him. In the end, he was completely dyed with the color of darkness. What seemed like an eternity of torture only lasted for a moment. In everyone's eyes, Grey Blade was just touched on the head, and he instantly froze in place, dumbfounded. Then, he let out a shrill scream. Thick darkness spewed out from his mouth and nose, and steel birds were reborn from the darkness one after another. They spread their wings and flew into the sky, shrouding the entire territory in eternal darkness. All the kobolds from Dragonscale Settlement were pulled into the terrifying shadow from the abyss. Despair spread like a plague. No matter how heavy the armor was, or how heavy the chariot was, this bloodline curse was madly spreading. Every soul within reach was pulled into the darkness where countless souls were buried. In the eternal silence and tranquility, all souls were rapidly collapsing. Then, under the corrosion of plagues and curses, they rapidly reassembled. Countless noises reverberated in their ears, constantly trampling on their willpower and resistance. In the end, the noises seeped into every part of their souls, not allowing them to resist. Gradually, the noisy and unbearable sounds seemed to become pleasing to the ears, like the fanatical chanting of countless souls, attracting people and making them want to be immersed in it. Nothing, don't think. All he had to do was to devote himself to this unprecedented happiness. Give all your souls and will to the fanatical chanting, to the great name that constantly appeared in the chanting. Ah, praise the eternal King of Hell. Holy, 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 the Lord of Darkness, Despair, and End. Bahamut. Thus, after a short period of dead silence, the violently twitching kobolds suddenly stopped, a blazing light appearing in their lifeless eyes. They hoarsely muttered something, but in the end, it turned into fanatical shouts. Holy, holy, holy. As far as the eye could see, all the kobolds in Dragonscale Settlement respectfully prostrated themselves on the ground, devoutly praising and singing. They did not dare to raise their heads to look at the descending Lord and God. Huaisher, on the other hand, finally walked out of the ruins of the ship with Grey Blade's head. As if he finally realized that he was naked, he casually grabbed with his hand, and a metallic light spread from his fingertips. Soon, it turned into a gray-black robe that was draped over his body. Under the gloomy sky, his handsome face looked even more strange and gloomy. However, a strange light flashed in his eyes from time to time, as if they contained the essence of hell and the abyss, the crystallization of pain and despair. Phew, that feels good. He stretched his body as if there was no one around. Amidst the crisp, cracking sounds, he looked around and finally saw the terrified Nagas not far away. The moment he raised his finger, a figure suddenly rushed out from the Naga cavalry. She knelt on the ground. She respectfully greeted, "Sir Huaishur, long time no see." Huaishur's movements paused slightly. He looked at the Nagas in front of him in confusion. "You know me?" The female Naga respectfully replied, "I know. My predecessor was under your command and served you." Huaishur thought for a moment and instantly understood. The only time he had interacted with the Nagas was when he was in the Village of Dusk. However, at that time, the commander of the Naga army, the respected elder of the army, should be a male, right? If he remembered correctly, based on the characteristics that the respected elder taught him, the respected elder in front of him should be a female, right? "After serving you, I participated in the war between two rulers and died gloriously. My body and seeds were transported back to the embrace of the eternal ring, and I was reborn as one of the four descendants," the female Naga explained. The female Naga explained, "I've inherited my predecessor's memories and status. According to the present world, I'm his daughter." The reason why the Naga army was not afraid of death was because of the glands in their bodies that could store memories and the mysterious eternal ring. As long as the glands could be recovered, they could be reborn under the nurturing of the ruler, the eternal ring. In the depths of hell, the ruler was known as the merciful and cruel mother. It was because she cherished each of her descendants, but was never stingy with their lives. Only Nagas who fought to the death could gain her favor, especially warriors like the respected elder who had experienced hundreds of battles. Seeing the different respected elder in front of him, Huaishur was stunned for a moment and did not know what to say. He scratched his head and looked around. When old friends meet, we should have a good chat. Unfortunately, this does not seem to be a good place to talk. He asked, "Is it convenient to leave an address? I will pay you a visit another day." "Yes," the respected elder replied. "Our evergreen settlement is located under the northern Great Tower of the Rusty Tower Forest. There are signs along the way. If you want to visit, we welcome you at any time." Seeing the other party's magnanimous attitude, Huaishur was speechless. "Are you not worried that I have bad intentions? If Sir Huaishur had bad intentions, he would not have kept me alive until now, right?" The esteemed elder shook his head nonchalantly. "A hero like Lady Huaishur wouldn't make such hypocritical designs for the sake of my settlement." "Then, I will see you another day." Huaishur nodded and waved his hand, indicating that the dragon-scale settlement that had become his own to disperse and let them go in and out. Just like that, he watched the Naga army leave. Then, next, he looked around at the ruins in front of him and the countless believers who were crawling in front of him. As soon as he fell, he was given a lot of tools. His luck was really good. "Where is your settlement?" he asked. Greyblade pointed in a direction without raising his head. The nearest settlement had towering walls and was heavily guarded. "Your house looks quite big. If you're tired from playing, you can sleep directly." Huaishur nodded and patted his head. "Okay, let's go there. Also, you guys should also tidy up and see if there is anything that can still be used here. Don't waste it." Soon, under Huaishur's order, all the members of the Dragonscale settlement were mobilized. They began to rummage through everything in the Big Tooth settlement. At the same time, they caught a large group of ratmen hiding in the ruins and tied them up. Not long after, in the sound of smoke rising from the steel chariot, the sun ship covered with a thick layer of felt was slowly dragged up. Under many burning and greedy gazes, it disappeared behind the gate of the Dragonscale settlement. 10 minutes later, there was no more Dragonscale settlement. Only the sign of the Bahamut cult's Talon branch rose. If you ask me, I'd say it's freaking strange. Raymond lay on a hospital bed in a large, temporarily remodeled workshop, swallowing origin crystals to quickly recover his HP. However, when he saw the countless fanatical kobolds in front of him, he felt that something was wrong. He had known that Huaishur was very strange. However, he had never thought that this guy would be even more strange after coming to the Infernal Realm. If celestial genealogy had a buff in the abyss, then it would have been fine. However, This wasn't just a buff. It was a version ahead, wasn't it? Isn't it normal to become stronger after spending money? Huaishur calmly sat on his throne, enjoying the kobolds' offerings. He even held his baton and directed the kobolds to sing a pious hymn. He had listened to the same tune tens of thousands of times. It was easy to command them. The iron crows had already flown in all directions, still searching for information on this infernal realm. However, they hadn't expected that they would be swept to the 37th level by the storm. They had crossed more than half the distance to the outpost at the 45th level. However, the outpost location was slightly remote. The captain still needed to compare the signal and location of the lighthouse to calculate a new route. Also, the damage to the sun ship needed time to be repaired. They couldn't just rely on Raymond's beast soul. At the same time, Professor Anton and Gregory needed to further investigate whether there were any hidden dangers left behind by the advancement. The entire process would take a few days. They would probably have to settle down in this infernal realm first. Otherwise, Huaishur wouldn't have been bothered to inject all the kobolds with origin substance and infect them all into his believers. In other words, celestial genealogy's affinity with the abyss was good. Coming to the infernal realm was like returning home. The path of Heaven's Inquisition was good at modifying the environment of the infernal realm. Huaishur was also great Ximing and Xianjuan. Before the latter advanced, her interference with the infernal realm was limited. However, Great Ximing's branch included full control of a large group of people, especially when coupled with the many vicious poisons and terrifying curses contained in Huaishur's origin substance, as well as the extremely high suppression brought about by the qualitative change of his divinity. Encountering such a large group of cannon fodder that relied on numbers was no different from cooking 2 dishes. He directly used the ultimate, then brainwashed them with ashes, infected them with origin substance, the halo of fear, and finally the plague of faith. With drugs and training, the entire set would take less than 3 minutes. The other party would turn into the shape of Bahamut and would never be able to leave Huaishur. No wonder Tangi once said that his path was most suitable for an illegal cult. This was the first time he had fully unleashed the power of Great Ximing. Even Huaishur was shocked by this. With such a ridiculous ability, if he made the slightest mistake, he might be able to cause a lot of trouble in the present realm. From this, it could be seen that the founders of the Utopia were truly extraordinary. While everyone was still fighting for correction points in the present realm, they had already set their sights on the infernal realm in search of a bright future. Not to mention the other paths, just the Dust Path's combat strength, the Eternal Path's huge equipment, and the Heaven's Inquisition Path's logistical support and recruitment of cannon fodder. As long as 3 or 4 people formed a team, they would be a living war machine. If they were thrown into any infernal realm, as long as there was no ruler to suppress them, they would be able to set off a storm of blood. Just look at Raymond and you would know. The White Dragon, who had just advanced, had been chased down by Hades and then encountered the deep storm. He had fallen to the 37th level of the abyss and smashed into the ground. In the end, he was completely fine. The main frame was only slightly deformed, and the passengers were completely unharmed apart from being shaken up a little. Although many of the instruments had been damaged, with the supreme quality of the origin blood, a little bit of origin crystal would be enough to make up for it. After Professor Anton and Gregory finished their examination, he would be fully recovered in a day or 2. Where else in the entire realm could one find such a sturdy and durable tool other than celestial genealogy? It was precisely because of such conditions that he had. Huaishur's mind became active again. Hey, what are you thinking about? Raymond already had PTSD, and when he saw this guy's eyes darting around, all the hair on his body stood on end. He had a feeling that he would be arranged at any time. Actually, even here, it's not absolutely safe. Huaishur shook his head, muttered to himself, and organized his words. As long as my name is still on the Jester's blacklist, they can lock onto my location at any time and target me. Raymond was stunned. We've already run more than 30 levels, and we're still in such a remote place. It can't be that bad, right? But what if it's not just Hades who wants to mess with me? Huaishur asked. As early as in the Thunder White Plains, When he saw the reforged withered mountain, Huaisher smelled something bad. That kind of hellish craftsmanship and power. The only thing that could make him think of was the Purgatory Workshop owners who directed the tragic end of the Twilight Village. In addition, Paradise also had to be taken into consideration. Looking at it this way, he was simply an enemy of the entire world in hell. Other than the Kitchen Demon Association and Hell Music, there were not many helpers at all. Now they had only fought for a temporary respite. Moreover, in the abyss, there was no safe zone for them to hide in. If they wanted to achieve their goal of reactivating the outpost and the Nautilus, it was useless to rely on escaping. It was inevitable that they would have a few head-on confrontations with them. Then it was imperative to accumulate strength and prepare for war. Now that there was an existence like the Sun ship that could at least run away, all plans had a foothold. Then, the key is, where can I find a group of cannon fodder that is so useful and doesn't hurt? Huaisher muttered to herself as she tapped the head of her chair. When he looked at the tower forest in the twilight outside the door, he unconsciously smiled. Chapter 1036. A few hours wasn't a long time in the present realm, but it was enough to spread the news of what happened during the day to every corner of the rusty pagoda forest. Right in the center of the pagoda forest, under one of the few complete pagoda forest towers, in the settlement that occupied the most abundant resources and the most crucial strategic location, several strange figures were circling around in a gloomy hall. The leaders of the 5 powerful settlements gathered here to discuss the abnormalities that happened during the day. The giant deformed skeleton shrouded in green flames, the leader of the Death Skull settlement, and the one wearing the crown, pondered for a moment after hearing the report. A golden ship that fell from the sky? Yes, that's right. What answered him was a pool of wriggling mud, in which 3 giant eyes were bobbing up and down, making a strange sound. I saw it very clearly at the time. It should be something that fell from a higher depth. It might be a treasure of one of the rulers in the War of Worlds. Other than that, is there any other news? It has already been taken away by the people of Dragonscale Settlement. Greyblade's actions were very fast. No one could react in time. The strange giant worm's wings trembled, making a buzzing sound. The female snake in Evergreen Settlement didn't say anything. I'm afraid she suffered a loss. They're all a bunch of people with ulterior motives. After hearing this, Undead said coldly, "Make Dragonscale Settlement hand it over. Otherwise, we won't protect them for this year's blood tax." Will they comply? The Eye of Sludge asked in a muffled voice. Those kobolds are all idiots who forget their own worth when they see a little profit. They don't have any brains. Maybe they're already arrogant. Things that are swallowed into their stomachs won't be spat out so easily. If they don't hand it over, then die. Undead was unmoved. A bunch of kobolds. If they can't be used mine, they would have already been used to offset the blood tax. But what happens after they take it? The Worm King asked the most important question. Study it together, share it together. Undead resolutely said, "You should all understand this, but now is not the time for internal strife. The Withered King's blood tax increases year after year, and if this continues, everyone will be conscripted into the army and serve him for eternity. As long as there is a ruler among us, we will have the opportunity to negotiate with the fallen nation. We won't be at the mercy of others. Then, I hereby swear." The giant Eye in Mud looked up slightly and said, "The demonic wisdom will bear witness to everything." Indeed, Undead raised his hand expressionlessly. Immediately after, Insect Lord, Deformed Monster, and Giant Eagle Girl also made the same promise. Under the witness of Bo Sun, the contract was established. Under the tremendous pressure of the Blood Soul tax, the leaders of the Rusty Pagoda Forest temporarily united, abandoning internal strife as much as possible. Then, let's give them a warning first. After the contract was established, Undead said, "Destroy half of the Dragonscale settlement and make those kobolds listen to us obediently. Also, make sure the other trash don't covet it." Indeed, this suggestion was unanimously approved by the other crown wearers, and they were not stingy with their contributions. "I'll do it." Undead took the lead and took out a bell from the sleeve of his tattered robe. He shook it slightly, but no sound came. However, everyone present felt a bone-chilling coldness. Under the dim light of the fire, their shadows actually began to shake and spasm, as if they wanted to leave their bodies. More shadows gathered from the distance. With the sound of bubbles bursting, the countless shadows that had been raised under the Dead Skull division burrowed out of the mud and gathered in the hall. After they gathered, they formed a large expanse of wriggling darkness. With a sticky sound, it gradually rose. From the strange silhouette formed by the countless shadows, an ear-piercing sound came. In the end, it turned into a large hand. Undead indifferently took out a bone coin and threw it out. The large hand grasped it tightly. Then there was the sound of a torrent rushing. The countless shadows scattered all over the place gathered into a large group. At this moment, they gathered into one and obeyed Undead's orders, turning into a strange pitch-black bird. Even if it was just under the cover of its wings, it was enough to steal all souls. "Go," Undead said. "Take half of their lives first." The giant shadow bird screeched silently. After penetrating the dome, it disappeared into the night. In the dark night sky, only a few confused crow cries could be heard. The advancement was very successful. Preliminary inspection, there are no problems. In the huge temporary workshop, Professor Anton sat on a bipedal machine and walked out of the sunship's warehouse. The equipment is operating normally. The part of the precise equipment that your beast soul can't repair is not damaged much. We also have enough parts in the supplies we brought. Raymond immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Compared to this, Huaisher was more concerned about other things. How is Professor Anton's physical condition? Me? Everything is normal. But if this goes on, I'm afraid the calcium tablets I brought are not enough. The old professor joked. He was still wearing a thick spacesuit. For Forster and Gregory, a depth of 39 meters might only be slightly uncomfortable. For Huaisher, the climate was simply pleasant. But Professor Anton was a scholar after all. Although there were laws to protect the soul, his essence was still in the category of ordinary people. People like him should be in the command center or mobile bays to provide support to Huaisher and the other footmen. But now that he was deep in hell, it would be doubly difficult. Now, the outside domain was completely hopeless for him. Once he took off his helmet, his internal organs would fail under the suppression of the abyss precipitation in a few seconds. Even if he injected the stabilizing agent of the Astronomical Society in time, he wouldn't be able to move for too long. He was already so old, and the weight of the spacesuit was there. Even with the help of the exoskeleton and the strong physique of the Russian Federation, it was impossible to be completely fine. Raymond first repaired the depth stabilizer and the enclosed activity cabin inside the sunship, so that he could move a little more freely after leaving the spacesuit. I know what I'm doing. I'll say it when I can't hold on. Besides, the vital signs monitor can't lie. Professor Anton raised his arm. On the small screen on his shoulder, all the vital signs were stable. The most important thing now is not me, but you. He said, Huaisher, is your plan serious? Huaisher nodded solemnly. He sighed and nodded slowly. Indeed, there is no better way now than this. I agree. What about the others? Forster nodded calmly. I have no objections. Gregory shrugged indifferently. Then the matter was settled. As for the unimportant things that were left out, no one cared too much. Then, does anyone want to add anything? Huaisher asked. If we want to integrate the creatures in hell and form enough combat power, I'm afraid there will be a lot of trouble in the middle. One had to know that for cannon fodder to be useful, it had to be based on the foundation of having a considerable elite strike force. Otherwise, it would be a waste. The key is still to strengthen ourselves. Gregory sighed. We're going back to where we came from. The strength of the people here was basically at the peak of their respective strengths. It was very difficult to improve. Raymond, who was the easiest to break through, had already advanced, but the existence of the sun's ship could only guarantee a retreat. Gregory had been close to the Grandmaster realm 40 years ago, but like dozens of other alchemists who were close to the Grandmaster realm, he looked very close. And in fact, he was very close, but he just couldn't King cross it. This kind of thing completely depended on fate. If it was in fate, it was there. If it wasn't in fate, it might really not be there. As for whether it was in one's fate, no one could say for sure. In the records of the present realm, there were even people who suddenly broke through when they were on the verge of death. But who dared to say that they had such good luck? Then, on paper, the strongest was Forster. Celestial genealogy was at the peak of the 4th level of the divine essence path. He was one of the 12 titans who inherited Gaia's legacy. With a gun in hand, he dared to fight the great Azura of the Eye of Nightmare one-on-one. But unfortunately, he was all stealthy observation and assassination. Don't talk to me about operations. What he wanted was to lose everything in one go. Once the number of opponents increased and they didn't want to line up, they would start to go bald. As for Huaishur, he had already fallen into a strange cycle. If he wanted to become stronger, he had to advance. But if he wanted to advance, he had to first deal with those guys who were chasing after him. But if he wanted to deal with those guys, he had to become stronger first. In the end, everyone turned to look at Redmond. Their expressions were strange. Raymond felt goosebumps all over his body. What's wrong? The tool man shook his head in horror. I'm working very hard. Look, I've already advanced. I also want to help, but my strength doesn't allow it. However, when everyone was deep in thought, they unanimously realized that the one who could easily become stronger was Raymond, who had just advanced. After all, they just needed to spend money. Raymond shook his head frantically and crossed his arms. Don't even think about it. There's no supply station. I can solve the secret instrument part. Gregory sighed regretfully. But there's no workshop. Smack! Huaishur slapped the saddlebag in front of him. The alchemist's eyes lit up, but he soon shook his head regretfully. Without a high-level catalyst and a complete large-scale secret instrument, there's no chance. Huaishur didn't say anything and patted his pocket. Fishball poked his head out and whimpered. As long as it was a garbage workshop, as long as it was paired with its existence, it would be the rebirth of Helios. But you don't have the blueprint. Raymond was stubborn. You've asked the right person, brother. The scarab stuck its head out of Huaishur's saddlebag and shouted excitedly. I know this very well. As the former core of Osiris's control, Beelzebub's database naturally couldn't be filled with storytelling and crosstalk. It also recorded the blueprints and manufacturing methods of many common equipment used in the Eternal Road. When necessary, it could also assist from the side for fine processing. I can deal with the repair workshop and large-scale equipment. Anton scratched his head through the helmet. Actually, if it's a simple version, it's possible to make it with some effort. After all, he was a mechanical scholar. 20% of mechanical scholars in the present world had to respectfully address him as Sir. It would be effortless for him to follow the blueprint. He alone was a complete, super-large production workshop. As long as there was a lathe, everything from small radios to large fighter jets was a piece of cake. So now we can deal with the blueprints, the secret instrument, alchemy, and the production workshop, Huaishur concluded. There's only one problem left. Thus, everyone helplessly fell into silence. Materials. No matter how awesome the workshop and the secret instrument were, or how awesome the production workshop was, they still needed materials. If they made do with ordinary goods, even the most awesome composite steel in the present world, it would probably explode in one overload. Just look at Osiris's skeleton. Tens of billions of dollars didn't even make splash. Was it because it was difficult to manufacture? No. As long as there was enough foundation, it wasn't difficult at all. But the materials were hard to find. No one could afford a project like Osiris, which was a waste of money and manpower. At the same price, there were more cost-effective ways. It was hard to recreate a miracle. Everyone, there's no need to be discouraged. On the bed, Raymond scratched his head. Although he really didn't want to be a tool, everyone was working toward the same goal now. Naturally, he wouldn't embarrass himself by pouring cold water on them. Why don't we try to search the other settlements? He suggested. Impossible. If we search from the beginning, how long will it take to find tens of thousands of different materials? Beelzebub sighed. Transit stations. Anton said. During the Great Retreat, many transit stations weren't emptied in time. We could try our luck. What about the deal? Gregory said. I have a few deep-traveling merchants in hell that I'm familiar with. As long as you give them enough money, they can get you anything. Of course, it was also possible that he would sell them off. How about I contact the Iron Crystal Constellation and ask them to send someone over? Forster asked. Regardless of whether they could deliver it in time, the construction of the Heavenly Prison Fortress had reached the most critical moment. If they tried to steal the Iron Crystal Constellation's resources now, the Master would really beat them up with a wrench. Just as they were brainstorming, Huaisher suddenly stood up and walked out. What are you doing? Raymond asked, confused. Going out to get some fresh air. Huaisher waved his hand and said casually, I'm also getting some takeout. Just outside the open door of the workshop, in a huge square of dragon-scale settlement, a steel bird landed from the sky. It landed on Huaisher's shoulder and squawked into his ear. Huaisher nodded when she heard this. He rubbed its head and pulled out a metal bar. Not bad. Thank you for your hard work. The crow excitedly flapped its wings, picked up the snack that Huaisher had given it, and ran off. Huaisher, on the other hand, raised his head and looked at the dark clouds in the sky. It was as if he had seen the giant shadow bird quickly approaching. He was filled with anticipation. He could sense that the shadow origin substance was concentrated in one place. It was as if he had smelled the fragrance of the ingredients in the kitchen. As soon as he saw them, his appetite was already greatly aroused. But behind the thick, dark clouds, the wriggling shadow bird that was about to pounce down suddenly stopped in midair. It could sense a terrifying threat from below. The moment it was seen by those eyes, the pure shadow beast actually felt an inconceivable sense of fear. Every inch of its shadow body trembled in fear, spasming, and finding it difficult to maintain its shape. The giant bird's form collapsed into a strange ball of darkness, frantically trying to climb higher. It turned around and fled without hesitation. It ran. It was like a certain delivery app. Delivery is here, delivery is gone. Now, delivery is 300 meters away from you. 2 minutes later, delivery is 3 kilometers away from you. The person waiting was furious. Why are you running? You're already here. Huaisher reached out and slowly clenched his fist. At that moment, the thick dark clouds rippled, and dozens of strange steel ropes appeared. They rubbed against each other, creating sparks as they whizzed toward the shadow beast. The shadow of nothingness was also bound by the ropes, unable to break free. It could not resist the pull from below and the terrifying attraction of the ultimate. It was pulled to the ground and fell. Its solidified body smashed into the ground, creating a loud bang. That strange shadow began to wriggle. It wanted to move again and escape. However, right after that, a foot stepped on its body. Trample. In an instant, Great Sea Ming's superior origin substance brought about an unparalleled suppression, nailing it to the ground. It could only see a smiling face right in front of it. Isn't this a coincidence? Shadow transformation. I can do it too. Huaisher smiled and raised his hand to greet it. Then, the Afong Long mace formed at his hand. It was aimed at its head. Smash! A loud bang was heard again. The shadow of nothingness actually stirred up layers of waves under the attack of this substance, trembling endlessly. Then another smash. The ground shook and the air billowed. A strong wind blew on the shocked faces of his teammates. Like a fisherman standing by the shore, Huaisher held the fishing line and the big stick in his hand and skillfully smashed the prey that had taken the bait. After 2 hits, the shadow only trembled and no longer had any strength to struggle. It wailed. It wanted to submit. It wanted to be spared. It wanted to live. Unfortunately, it was too late. Huaisher's right hand, which was covered in pale flames, had already pierced into the shadow of nothingness. Clench. The talent from Great Sea Ming was activated, forcefully suppressed, assimilated, and then transformed. Casting began. The huge shadow trembled and spasmed again, letting out a tragic cry that tore apart the silence. The squirming shadow that could not even fit the entire square began to shrink rapidly and then bulge. Under the cover of Yangsheng, it welcomed a brand new transformation. In the end, the terrifying monster that could wipe out the entire dragon-scale settlement had disappeared without a trace. Instead, it was replaced by a huge iron ingot. The strange iron ingot was as tall as two people. It stood on the spot like a small mountain. On the grayish-black surface, the distorted patterns were like distorted faces that were screaming silently. From time to time, a dim light would flow past, as if it contained endless darkness, and the chill was oppressive. Just like that, in the dead silence, Huaishir wiped the sweat off his forehead. A bright smile appeared on his face. It was filled with the simple joy of welcoming the harvest after the hard work. I was thinking, he turned around and asked, now, the problem of the materials should be solved, right? Chapter 1037. Yangsheng forcefully transformed the enemy's origin substance, turning them into shadows. Then, he used the sealing hand soul to reforge it into metal. Conversion, storage, and output. There was no loss or wastage. After 3 transformations, the ethereal origin substance turned into heavy metal. In this way, the weight of the soul could be measured through material means. Just like that, a body made up of countless shadow beasts turned into dozens of tons of cursed alloy. The whole series of transformations not only shocked everyone, but even Huaishir was a little dazed. This was not a new ability. It was just the development and application of his own stigmata ability according to the situation. Naturally, this result was achieved as easily as breathing. When Huaishir thought about it carefully, he did not find it strange at all. Instead, he felt that this was how it should be. This was how it should be done. This seemed to be some kind of instinct hidden at the bottom of miracles, some kind of tendency in application. For hell, souls adapted to hell. Mountain ghosts increased their resistance. Young Master Ming raised a large group of animals. Great Master Ming cleaned up the tribe and turned the enemy into the foundation of his own growth. Normal Great Master Ming did not have the sealing hand, alchemy fire, and forging furnace, so he could not complete the second half. But just the first half was enough to frighten people. Extracting the enemy's soul, forcefully transforming it into shadow origin substance, and storing it in the returning ruins. Not only could it strengthen oneself, but it could also support a large group of people and teammates. As long as there were enough enemies, there would never be a shortage of origin substance. For Yun Zhongjuan's line, starting from River Earl, the amount of origin substance would triple. After reaching Yun Zhongjuan's level, there would be a qualitative change. He would transform hell, and everything would revolve around him. When combined with Heavenly Palace, he would directly slap the enemy's face. Combined with the Divine Mark, Heaven's Inquisition, he would become a living, man-made ruler. Huaishir once again experienced why the celestial genealogy was called the Abyss genealogy. It was driven by the development of hell itself. Unlike other genealogies, it would feel restricted in the real world. Only in hell could it display its full power. While approaching the essence of the abyss without limit, it would also extract resources from hell without limit. One had to know that players were really scary. Even if it was just a change in a numerical value, it was enough for a bunch of lunatics to be unable to differentiate between day and night, let alone actually becoming stronger. As long as the monsters dropped enough materials, they would not hesitate to slaughter them. The more he killed, the more he earned, and the more he earned, the more he could continue to kill. In the end, a strange cycle was formed. After experiencing the convenience of celestial genealogy, this hellish special tool, Huaishir shook his head and smiled as he patted the iron ingot beside him. He asked Anton and Gregory, "Can I ask the two of you to evaluate this?" Wait a moment. After a brief moment of absent-mindedness, dozens of robotic arms quickly extended from Anton's bipedal machine. They surrounded the samples provided by Huaishur and began to examine them. At the same time, he compared the data from the Lord of the Flies. He couldn't hide his astonishment. As a basic material, there is no problem with all the data, Anton answered. If it's only for temporary use and not for long-term use, it's completely enough. Gregory was even simpler. He picked up the iron ingot, licked it, and bit it twice. Finally, he spat 2 mouthfuls of black saliva on the ground, wiped his mouth, and nodded. It's very compatible with miracles and disasters. It's the best conductor. You're really good at metal science. This thing can support the modification of most secret instruments. Huaishur nodded. So it can be used? Yes. The two nodded decisively. Huaishur asked again, then is it enough? Not enough. It was Beelzebub who answered. The upper limit is too low, and the properties are not suitable. It can't support the temperature of the God engine. Also, the properties are too simple, and the other materials are not enough. It can't meet the requirements of the atom armor. However, it can be used as the conduction matrix of the secondary armor. He said, we need more. Then go find more. Huaishur nodded and said without hesitation, I'm going out for a while. So fast. Raymond was dumbfounded. Courtesy demands reciprocity. Huaishur glanced into the distance and said calmly, they've already delivered food. I can't just eat and take it for free, right? Plus, don't we have a favor to ask of them? Since they had a favor to ask, they had to be more attentive. Don't be afraid of the door being closed or the cold attitude. Only by making a few more trips, paying more visits, saying more nice things, and bringing more gifts would the stingy master be more generous. Only then would he be able to be generous. Oh, give me all the coins of disaster and the supplies, Huaishur said. Give me 1/3 of the source form crystals. The rear cabin of the Sun ship opened. The Red Dragon's remote control car delivered everything Huaishur wanted to him. Do you want me to go with you? Raymond asked. No, you stay here with Gregory and Professor Anton. Huaishur shook his head. We need some basic defense here. After saying that, he looked at the chief engineer who was smoking. Mr. Forster, are you interested in going with me? Hunting, of course. The chief engineer who was wiping the gun smiled. I'd love it. 10 minutes later, the gate of Dragonscale Settlement opened again. Thousands of frenzied kobolds waved their weapons and raised the flag that had just been drawn. The steel chariots once again emitted thick smoke, and the sacred emblem of Bahamut was drawn in black ink on the chariots. The large group gathered into a tide and rushed into the darkness. Soon it disappeared. Half an hour later, the elder was awakened by the alarm. She opened her eyes and saw the projection of the guard behind the curtain. What's going on? She asked. Sir, someone is coming. It's the people of Dragonscale Settlement. There are countless of them, the guard said anxiously. A few minutes ago, they broke through the boundary marker and are almost at the gate of the settlement. War. The first conclusion that appeared in the elder's mind quickly disappeared. She asked again, where are the sentry posts? The other side didn't seem to be hiding, nor did they launch an attack. When they passed by, they even informed them to report to the settlement. They also said, the guard paused for a moment. They also said that they wanted to see the elder. Okay, I got it. The elder got up and put on a gray coat. She ordered, go and tell the people on the city wall to stay alert and not cause any conflict. A few minutes later, she saw the troop stopped outside the river in the light of the fire. They didn't have any intention of hiding their tracks. They even swaggered and sang hymns, holding the fire high to show their formation. And right at the front, on the top of the stalled chariot, sat a familiar figure. He was unhurriedly plucking a string of highly poisonous wild fruits. The overflowing juice also dyed his fingers green. The core of the fruit, which was enough to make a giant beast wail and die, was casually thrown into his mouth. Accompanied by a crisp chewing sound, it disappeared. When he saw the elder on the city wall, he waved his hand. He smiled. The elder was stunned for a moment. Soon, she came down along the rope and walked to the front of the army of Dragonscale Settlement. She asked directly, Sir Huaishur, why are you here? For hire. Huaishur didn't hide his purpose. For some reason, I want to cleanse this hell. Elder, Are you still interested in working for me? The elder was silent for a moment. She suddenly asked, "What if I refuse?" "Then, please don't get involved in this." Huaisha replied calmly, "Please don't worry. I won't just fight with the people who fought side by side in the past because of this small matter. You just need to pretend that nothing happened. Close the door and ignore whoever comes knocking. In a few days, everything will be over." In a short silence, the elder looked at Huaisha quietly. Huaisha also looked at her. After a long time, the Naga slowly lowered her head. "How many people do you want?" "The more, the better." Huaisha said, "Although I said that the more, the better, in reality, I don't know how to command and dispatch people. I know nothing about it. As such, I'll have to ask you to grasp the specific opportunities on your own. As long as you can accomplish your goal, you will have full autonomy." The elder nodded. "Then there will be 600 undead soldiers and 1,200 white-scale guards fighting for you. However, life has a price." "Sir Huaisha, how much can you pay?" Huaisha raised his hand. The kobolds, who had been waiting for a long time, carried 2 large boxes in front of him. The large metal boxes with the insignia of the ivory tower were filled with colorful metal pieces. They were currency formed from the sediment of hell and the remnants of calamities. There were many uses for it, and it could be used to travel between many hells. It was widely recognized by traveling merchants. "This is the down payment," Huaisha said. "In addition, apart from the origin crystals and relics, all the spoils of war and territory will belong to you." The elder shook her head. "You have no use for those things in hell. Also, with the withered king's blood tax, even if the rusty pagoda was given to us, we wouldn't be able to pay it." "What about the protection of the celestial genealogy?" Huaisha asked. The elder shook her head again. "The present is too far away. The ivory tower is too far away." Huaisha thought for a moment, but couldn't think of any more attractive bargaining chips. She helplessly shook her head. "Then let me hear your conditions. We don't need territory. If your plan succeeds, we probably won't be able to stay in the rusty pagoda any longer. Do you need me to find a way out for you?" "That's a bit troublesome." Huaisha shrugged. "I have many enemies in the infernal realm, but not many friends. Or are you willing to join the Culinary Demon Committee or the Infernal Music Association? If that's the case, I can give you a letter of recommendation. No, we could go to other Naga settlements. With the spoils of war and rewards, it won't be difficult to establish a new settlement." The elder thought for a moment, then said, "But other than these rewards, we still have 700 hatchlings and 1,000 eggs, as well as 60 pregnant women." She looked at Huaisha and said seriously, "You have to personally host the transformation ceremony for them, so that they won't have to worry about dying." For a moment, Huaisha was slightly stunned. Although he wasn't clear about the transformation ceremony, it should be a secret method used by the Naga settlements to protect newborns and pregnant women. From a certain point of view, Huaisha was indeed an excellent candidate. Who told him to be the young master of life, the protector of the young? With him hosting, the effect of the ceremony would be many times stronger. He didn't have any reason to object to this. For the sake of an old friend, I can't agree. But I've never done it before, so I can't guarantee the results. So, this isn't a condition. Let's change it. How about the 100 Eyes Settlement's bone transplant pond? The elder said, "If you have other uses for it, just let us use it once." "Okay," Huaisha nodded. "Even if I can't give it to you, I'll compensate you with other things of equal value." After a short silence, the elder sighed and respectfully prostrated herself on the ground. She offered her loyalty and praise. "Go put on your armor, children." When she returned to the front of the city gate, she brought with her an order from Huaisha. "The time for war has come." An hour later, under the burning tower, the heavily fortified city was right in front of them. The kobold from Dragonscale Settlement were singing hymns loudly. It was fine that they didn't have the self-awareness of a sneak attack, but the devotion and fanaticism in their eyes from time to time made the undead army, who were their allies, feel a little scared. Even the crude steel chariots were letting out a hiss of a tune. The leader was Greyblade, who used to rely on the protection of a few large settlements to run rampant. At this moment, when he wanted to rebel against the protectors, He completely forgot about the favor and deterrence of the past. He fanatically held a large flag and walked at the front. The day of destruction has come. The emissary of the ruler has come. His spirit moves in the void, bringing down the end and destruction. Repent, sinners, touch your wealth, embrace your children, and trample on your slaves. Enjoy your last joy. The day of destruction has come. The fanatical shouts were endless and resounded through the sky. The mighty long line was endless, attracting the attention of many settlements along the way. However, after noticing such a strange situation, no one dared to block the way. They just secretly watched. Beside Huaishi's chariot, the elder riding a giant lizard looked around and finally looked at the city in the distance that had been alarmed. "Your Excellency, why did you choose this place first?" She said. 100 Eyes Settlement is one of the 5 joint rulers of the rusty pagoda forest. They have the existence of the crown. If we rely on the cannon fodder of Dragonscale Settlement, I'm afraid it won't be of any use. Instead, it will alert the enemy. On the chariot, Huaishir thought seriously and raised his finger. 2 reasons. I'd like to hear the details. The elder listened attentively. First, Huaishir said solemnly, 100 Eyes Settlement is perverse and cruel. It caused the people to complain and caused many tragedies to happen in the rusty pagoda forest. Today, we raise the flag of rebellion to overthrow the oppression and rule of hell and regain the right to freedom. In the silence, the elder was confused. She touched the scales of her perception and hearing. She only felt that something was not right. The right to freedom. That kind of thing, did hell have it? Then, she asked doubtfully, what's the second reason? Because it's close to home. Huaishir replied, it's convenient to clean and tidy up. For some reason, the elder felt that compared to those excuses that even he did not believe, this was probably the real reason. Just as she was about to say something, she suddenly heard the sound of wind exploding. Amidst the mournful cry, something fell from the sky. On the city wall not far away, a huge ballista pulled the trigger. Suddenly, thick and heavy arrows whistled toward Huaishir at the front. The elder's expression suddenly changed. She wanted to draw her sword. But then, she saw a grayish-black iron light sweep through the clouds. It was as if it had picked up something fun. The iron bird swooped down. Its sharp claws grabbed the huge ballista arrow that was as thick as an arm. With a pull, the terrifying force that was enough to tear apart the city wall seemed to disappear in an instant. It was easily pinched into 3 pieces. Soon, the iron bird rose again with the heavy arrow in its mouth and flew into the clouds. It disappeared. At this time, the difference between the 2 sides could be seen. It was different from the chaos of the kobolds. Even if they had the support of faith, it now exposed the poor quality of the soldiers. The iron chariot even fired back on its own without any orders. Burning viscous asphalt spewed out from the thick body of the cannon like a huge fireball. It flew in the air and smashed on the city wall, turning into a splash of mud. It could not create any effective damage at all. On the other hand, the Nagas were still calm. The undead army cavalry had already spread out in formation, while the white-scale guards holding up their shields began to gather quickly like an iron wall pushing forward. The shamans who followed the army waved straw and sprinkled water droplets of either sweet, dew, or poison on everyone's body. They were ready for battle. Without the support of enough secret tools, this group of kobolds would probably be used as cannon fodder in a war of attrition. The undead army and white-scaled, heavy-armored guards of the Evergreen settlement were the effective forces to attack the city. However, Huaishir never had any expectations for the kobolds. It was good enough that they could make up the numbers and do odd jobs. They were not much stronger than the Ratmen. As for those who were convenient and considerate to use, he could only use the trumpet to attract people from the park. He wondered how many upgrades Kitten had made for his good brothers after not seeing them for a long time. Huaishir was suddenly looking forward to it. Not bad, at least I don't have to greet them. Huaishir shrugged and looked at the settlement hundreds of meters away where the trumpet was blowing and countless heads were surging. He scrutinized the solid city that had obviously been built with great effort. The thick walls were enough to withstand the impact of the cannon chariots. The protruding towers on both sides were surging with a strange light of secret tools. It was obvious that they were brewing the power to counterattack at any time. There was even a deep moat with layers of shadows surging inside. It was already filled with bloodthirsty aquatic creatures. It seems that the other party has not let down their guard at all. The elder sighed softly. Sir, without large equipment, it will be difficult for us to take down the outer defense in a short time. It's okay. Huaishur held the iron mace and suddenly revealed a strange smile. Don't we have a river here? At that moment, he pinched Ah Fong's wrist and turned it slightly. A loud boom sounded. The sound of the tide filled the sky. Chapter 1038. Amidst the hustle and bustle of the night, there were countless shouts, screams, and synchronized hymns. At this moment, there was a new rhythm. The sound of waves surged. It was as if a massive wave was sweeping over, stirring up a hurricane. Everyone instantly froze and lowered their heads in shock, only to see the surging flood. The deep moat actually began to surge violently at this moment. It was as if it was boiling. No, this was boiling. Countless dead fish and other aquatic species began to appear on the surface of the river as the water temperature rapidly rose. A fishy stench mixed with the gradually rising steam and rose up. It was as if an invisible ghost was laughing savagely. Among the temperature applied by the foundry, the heat that was enough to incinerate steel was now spreading in the river. Huaishur's right arm instantly turned into metal, already burning red. The terrifyingly high temperature even caused the chariot beneath his feet to begin to emit black smoke. Within the ruins of End, origin substance crystals rapidly decreased, turning into firewood that was tossed into the furnace, causing this terrifying temperature to rise without end. This continued until the surging flood in the river began to boil. In less than a few minutes, amidst ear-piercing screams, the boiling river began to surge, churning towards the city. It was as if a wriggling giant had reached out its hands, clinging to the towering city walls. The formless and intangible boiling water began to rise, bit by bit, inch by inch, approaching those despairing faces, until, under the spears of the supervisors, they were suddenly swallowed up by the rising flood of boiling water. Miserable screams rose and fell. Under Ah Fong's orders, countless amounts of boiling water defied gravity, spreading over the city walls and pouring into the walled city. The pitch-black water contained countless vicious poisons and curses. The moment it covered the walled city, all living creatures began to sizzle and melt. On the two bastions on either side, dozens of cold white rays suddenly descended, attempting to freeze the boiling water. However, the enraged river water quickly spread, swallowing up the bastions first. Looking from afar, it was like a strange scene in two crystal balls. The grayish-black color quickly spread, corroding the secret instrument and dissolving all souls within reach. In the end, under Ah Fong's continuous transportation, the moat formed by the deep ravine was emptied. All of the water flowed into the settlement through the river in the air, raging and surging. An invisible force descended from the sky, stirring up the boiling water, causing it to surge endlessly. After swallowing up an inch of space, it formed a terrifying whirlpool. Turbulence reverberated in the air. Under the torment of malice and calamity, the sealed settlement of 100 Eyes had turned into a scorching cauldron. Something even more bizarre and terrifying was brewing in the torrent of darkness. In the dead silence, only the fanatical chanting could be heard. Then what exactly? Seeing this strange situation, the elder subconsciously held the reins and asked in disbelief, "What is that thing?" This. Huaishur held the red-hot Ah Fong and thought for a moment. I met an old man before. Although his character wasn't very good, he was good at cooking, so I secretly learned a thing or two. What kind of answer was that? What did that have to do with cooking? How could something like that be secretly learned? The elder's mind was in a mess. Looking at the city shrouded in boiling water, he only felt a bone-chilling coldness. Secretly learning is still secretly learning. My skills are still not up to par. Huaisher sighed regretfully. At best, it can only cause a little disturbance. If Guashuk was here and saw this half-baked pot of boiled cabbage, he might have laughed out loud. How could this be considered an exquisite magical cooking dish? It was nothing more than a big pot of stewing. At most, it relied on numbers to feed people. It was still far from reaching the realm of gourmet food. But even just causing a disturbance was enough. Otherwise, how could those heavyweights hiding in the city be willing to show up so easily? At this moment, along with the roar of the boiling water, angry roars burst out from Hundred Eye Settlement. It even suppressed the sound of the tide and the loud noise of the flood. The sharp sound echoed under the night sky, causing waves of piercing pain in the eardrums. In the city, the surging flood gradually stopped. A huge shadow slowly rose, as if it was about to overflow from the cauldron, along with a strange stench. Who knew how many kobolds foamed at the mouth and fainted? Under the protection and support of the huge secret apparatus, a huge silhouette rose into the sky. It was the three-eyed mud monster that had participated in the meeting in Dead Skull Settlement. At this moment, once it fully unfolded its body, the mud-like substance gathered into a huge, ferocious head. It was like a building constantly wriggling. Sticky liquid dripped down. In the mud, terrifying giant eyes appeared one after another, staring coldly at the enemy. It roared furiously. Countless stinky mud fell from its body, quickly condensing in the air, forming a sharp silhouette, sprinkling outside the city like a storm. A Fong turnaround. The thick steam quickly condensed into layers of water curtains, holding up the defense. But right after that, the giant head of mud roared and swooped down towards them. These days, even the toilet can become a spirit. Huaisher sighed softly. He supported Ah Fong with one hand, unmoved, and on the other steel chariot, an old felt blanket had been spread out. The patterns on it had been blurred with the passage of time. On top of it, there was another layer of black velvet cloth. Hunting rifle parts were placed one after another, and they were quickly assembled by a pair of calloused hands. It was placed next to Forster. The chief engineer sat cross-legged on the felt, holding a long brass bullet in one hand and a small skinning hook knife in the other, correcting the engravings on it. Name? Forster suddenly asked. What's the name of the person wearing the crown? Name? The snake shaman beside him was puzzled. Yes, name. Tell me, what's its name? Forster said, it's okay if it's a code name, a derogatory name, or a title is fine too. In short, it's a name. Five Eyes. Under the huge shadow, the shaman racked his brains to search. Finally, from the corners of his memory, he found a name. It calls itself 5 Eyes. Okay, 5 Eyes. The sharp hook knife instantly moved like a dragon. After writing 2 words on the bullet, the hook knife spun and disappeared from Forster's hand. As for the brass bullet, it had already been loaded into the barrel of the gun. He casually aimed at the sky. He pulled the trigger. Goodbye. Then, an ear-piercing whistle came from the barrel. A dazzling golden light spread out its wings and flew out at a speed that was difficult for the naked eye to follow. In the air, it drew a strange arc and disappeared into its face. After piercing through the endless mud, it came out from the back of its head. But then, it suddenly made a strange turn and came back in the opposite direction. In the blink of an eye, the sky was filled with the intricate trajectory of the bullet. Countless long distances entangled with each other, as if it had become a mess. Then, the trajectory of the bullets in the sky suddenly converged inwards. Then, there was a tragic scream from the mud. Dozens of huge eyeballs exploded in an instant. In the loud sound of the collapse, the huge head shattered layer by layer and scattered everywhere. In the blink of an eye, only an incomplete outline was left. It flew out in horror, unable to believe everything in front of its eyes. Fear. It didn't die. No, it died 4 times. Forster had already put down the gun and sighed with emotion. There's actually one left. On his right arm, Layers of runes flashed for a moment, forming a solemn and mysterious array. Such exaggerated lethality did not come from the enhancement of the hunting rifle. What was used was also not some terrifying bullet. It was just an ordinary deer-hunting bullet. This tragic ending was already destined the moment the trigger was pulled. In the path of inheriting divinity, there were two major branches. One's endpoint was Kronos, who had unified the changes of time and grasped the shadows of the past and the warnings of the future. The other endpoint was Gaia, Mother Earth, who gave birth to everything, raised everything, and buried everything. Unfortunately, whether it was the wisdom to control everything or the compassion to tolerate everything, Forster did not have either of these two. But back then, didn't everyone use whatever they had and use whatever was convenient for them? If they had known that they would be able to get to rank 4 in this lifetime, who wouldn't have carefully chosen the most suitable endpoint? Forster had long since gotten over this. Rank 4 was also pretty good. What a rank 5 could hunt, a rank 4 could also fight. What a rank 5 could surf, a rank 4 could still surf. There was no difference in the days. Moreover, wasn't he usually just burning the boiler on the submarine? Why was he so particular? And in the path of the divine marrow, no matter where the end point was, there was no difference between rank 4. They were all demigods with the characteristics of gods and hell at the same time. This was not even limited to the former 12 titans. Instead, according to the offerings offered by the advanced and the compatibility of their souls, they would obtain the bloodline and blessings of the 3 titans. Among them, the one who was unshakable was the titan hidden in the unknown, the legendary ancestor of humans, Iapetus. What he bestowed was resistance against hell and a terrifying vitality that could survive even in the desperate situation of Nether Prison. Apart from that, it was the part that Forster was most embarrassed to say, because the remaining 2 titans who blessed him were both women among them. One was Munine, born from memory and history, and the other was the goddess in charge of glory and revelation, Fubai. Thus, the miracles of memory and history, glory and revelation were entrusted to Forster. This was indeed an irreplaceable and excellent help for the archaeology of the abyss and the development of hell, but it did not have direct damage. This situation continued until the Great Grandmaster's experiment. After countless attempts, Forster finally combined the power of the two and touched the moment of destiny. At best, it was just to the extent of the edge. However, in the endless variables and terrifying pressure, at the moment when Forster was on the verge of collapse, what was left was an understanding that was engraved in the depths of his soul. It could not be investigated, described, and at the same time spied. It was a miracle that could not be solidified with the divine mark. If it could be reluctantly described, it would be the shadow of destruction and the road to the end. It was just like the legendary 3 goddesses of fate cut the thread of the dead. This was an intuition. How to lead the enemy to destruction. It had nothing to do with the evil curse. Even Forster himself could not believe the Great Grandmaster's conclusion. This was a prophecy that belonged to him alone, foretelling the death of the enemy and making the prophecy take the initiative to fulfill. It looked like an aimed shot, but the fate of the enemy had been shrouded in the haze of death as early as when a name was engraved on the bullet. Pulling the trigger was the step of activation, and the bullet was just a medium responsible for transporting the death of the future to the present. In the end, the result was death. When the target was a human, the lethality of this blow could be said to be terrifying, and there was no way to dodge or escape. But if the opponent was not human, in many cases, this kind of speechless situation would occur, dead, but not completely dead. More than half of them were dead, but there was still a part of them alive. This is going to be a little awkward. Forster scratched his cheek and lost his composure. He did not know whether to say that it was an aberration or bad luck. This crowned person named Five Eyes was a strange monster formed by the fusion of 5 hell creatures through a secret instrument. At this moment, when Five Eyes was frightened by this blow and fled in panic, Countless bones and rotten internal organs fell from the huge amount of sludge that kept falling from the sky. He did not even care about his own nest. He fled for his life. Forster sighed and took out another bullet from his pocket. This time, he did not engrave the name on it. How could the target who had died once die a second time? Before he finished reloading, a shrill scream came from the end of the sky. In midair, Five Eyes, who was fleeing in a hurry, trembled violently. Suddenly, a big hole was blasted open. Then, there was another one. It was as if there was an invisible thing that suddenly crushed his body. It caused the shapeless mass of mud to constantly wail and collapse. It quickly collapsed, but no matter how he fled and struggled, he could not get rid of the thin thread wrapped around his body. The thread, condensed from water vapor, had long been deeply immersed in his body, and the other end was wrapped around Ah Fong. Hell was so big that he had nowhere to run. Every time Huai Shi's finger tapped on Ah Fong's handle, a terrifying impact from the stone marrow hull burst out in his body. Once, twice, thrice. The thunder was muffled like winter thunder. What came next was not rain, but endless mud and pollution. Five Eyes' broken body completely collapsed. He could no longer maintain his huge body, forming a stinking rainstorm. Among the countless corpses, there was only one deformed body with 10 arms that was pulled away by a bird, casually tossing it back to the 100 Eyes settlement. From then on, there was no more movement. Only the fire of the furnace burned the dark clouds red. The sound of the tide echoed. Hell was recreated from the cauldron. When the casting began again, everything came to an end in the muffled sound of boiling. It's about time. After a long, long time, when Huai Shi let go of Ah Fong's handle, the 100 Eyes settlement no longer made any sound. In the dead silence, no one spoke. Only the sound of peeling and collapsing rang out. The venerable elder stared blankly at the fortress that returned to darkness. It was over. Originally, it was expected that the fortress would be opened with the help of large-scale siege equipment and gray-scaled assassins at the same time, after paying a huge price of casualties. Now, there was nothing left. As if thousands of years had passed in an instant, the ravages of time brought about rapid collapse and weathering. The huge gate broke with a bang and fell to the ground, rusting into dust. In the settlement behind the gate, there were only streams of wastewater that flowed out from within. They meandered across the ground and returned to the moat. When a burning arrow cut through the darkness and fell into the settlement, it made the silent colossus reveal a dignified silhouette, reflecting cold light. It was a mountain of steel forged by the crown wearer and countless aberrations. Countless metal ingots were stacked layer by layer. Some were dark, some were bright, the specifications were different, and the materials were also different. But when they gathered in one place, the aura they emitted made all living things tremble from the soul. It was difficult to breathe. Now, you can go in. Huai Shi turned around and ordered the believers kneeling on the ground. Move faster. I am in a hurry. Chapter 1039. Outside the border area surrounded by the present zone, it was still below the deep zone, far in the deepest part of the withering zone. Here, even the surging of the deep tide could be clearly sensed. Even though he had become blind on the strange sampan, Hades could still sense the turbulent undercurrent outside, as well as the terrifying power brewing from the deepest part of the abyss, the lowest level of hell. We're almost there. The black-robed man who was rowing the oar spoke with a hoarse voice. When the layers of dark fog were blown away by the undercurrent, what was revealed in front of the tiny sampan was a terrifying world so vast that it seemed to fill the entire abyss. The Hell of Hell. After penetrating through the 16th level, it was the supreme palace that was forged into one by endless time. The Withered King's territory was where the fallen kingdom was located. At this moment, under the rainbow light of the hell body, there were countless legions advancing towards the present zone along the path at every moment. The large group of gray and black that gathered in one place was like the blood flowing in the veins. It rose bit by bit. until one day, the entire present zone was completely covered by it. A large hand formed by pale bones reached out from the deepest part of the darkness and grabbed the tiny sampan. But when the 5 fingers spread out again, Hades appeared in the deepest part of the palace from outside the fallen kingdom, under the cold and solemn door. Behind him was the endless staircase formed by the stairs for an audience. Is this an exception for a disabled person like me? Hades flicked the dust off his sleeves as if mocking him, and right in front of him, the jester who was waiting there had a gloomy expression. He glanced at him with a displeased expression. "You're late." "That's true, but I still came, didn't I?" Hades looked at the door beside him with his empty eye sockets as if he could see the eerie and strange existence behind the endless darkness. "I came to receive my punishment. You have to understand that your incompetence has brought great losses to His Majesty and us," the jester said. "The consequences that await you will not be good." "I know." Hades nodded and said nothing more. After a moment of silence, the ceremonial officer guarding the door did not step aside. Instead, he pointed to the side and said, "Since it's already late, there's no harm in waiting a little longer." He paused for a moment and glanced at the huge shadow creeping up the stairs. "Let that idiot go in first." Under the shackles and chains, the staggering giant was dragged up bit by dozens of strong men. The higher it went, the more the huge body trembled. Even though he was the ruler of hell, in front of this majestic palace, he was as humble as dust. In the territory of a fallen country, rulers were not rare, but there would always be only one supreme emperor. Anyone who dared to go against the will of the emperor would receive absolute punishment. As if it had foreseen the arrival of the end, the giant struggled with all its might. All the mouth parts on its body wailed, but when a door opened with a bang, all the sound disappeared. At the highest point, a pair of eyes looked down indifferently. Soon, the giant ruler who was brought in was brought out again. On a golden frame inlaid with luxurious gems, in an exquisite tapestry, a skillful craftsman vividly recreated the face full of fear and despair. It wailed eternally in the burning flames. But there was no sound. After venting his anger on the idiot, His Majesty added a new collection. His Majesty should be in a better mood, the jester said. "You can go in now." He did not disguise his words. In such a short distance, the voice even seemed to be narrating in the ears of the King of Withered, but there was no response from the palace. It seemed that the King of Withered did not care that his subject was trying to figure out his emotions. The door opened again. After a short silence, Hades lowered his head and stepped in. In the eternal darkness, he was actually a little absent-minded for a moment. He did not know whether he should hate Huaishur for what he did or thank him for taking away his eyes. At least at this moment, he was glad that he was blind. He could not see anything. He could only feel the terrifying existence sitting at the highest point in the darkness. Just by looking down, it was as if the darkness was stirred, making it difficult for Hades to breathe. "Why do you want to have an audience, Hades?" A curious voice came from the throne. The King of Withered looked down and asked coldly, "I remember that the last time I had an audience was not long ago." In a dead silence, Hades lowered his head in the direction of the voice. He did not dare to play around with words and answered directly, "I have an important responsibility." "Indeed, you should be afraid." The King of Withered's tone became playful. "But do you think I should be angry because of this?" Hades was silent, breathing heavily. In this short silence, he could only feel the gaze from the darkness, but he could not tell whether the words were a joke or something else. The only thing he could be sure of was that his answer might decide his fate, would decide whether he could leave this place in one piece or become a companion on the tapestry. But no matter how hard he thought, he could not find a complete answer. He took a deep breath and replied bitterly, "That's right. I don't know." A sneer came from the throne. It was impossible to tell whether it was mockery or praise. "Very good. Hades, I love your honesty." The King of Withered said, "Honesty is the foundation of loyalty. You have never lied to me, so I will let you go." Hades stiffened, not knowing whether he should be grateful or humble. He did not dare to respond. He could only kneel on the ground and accept the result that was his. Let us return to the original matter, about your mistake. The king of Withered said, "It was indeed a crushing defeat, and it also delayed the march of the fallen country. The operation of an Agilfa fleet was also hindered because of this. Hades, you betrayed my expectations of you, and this cannot make up for the loss you caused. You deserve to die 10,000 times." "That is true," Hades replied, giving up on all hope. "Then, after experiencing this setback, you must have made some progress, right?" The king of Withered asked, "Since all of you jesters are proud of your wisdom, why don't you tell me? How did you lose? Delay and negligence." Hades replied straightforwardly, "In order to be fully prepared, I gave my opponent a chance to attack, but in the end, I couldn't catch them in time and allowed them to escape, causing the fallen country to suffer the humiliation of defeat. Perhaps, but you are mistaken about one thing." The king of Withered casually said, "For a fallen country, failure is never a humiliation. Victory and defeat are never rare. As long as there's a war, there will always be a victor, and then there will always be a loser. Victory is naturally worth bragging about, but defeat is also normal. As long as you don't die, there will always be a day when you win. Whether it is recuperating or struggling at death's door, it is all for the sake of waiting for the future. But your sin is not failure, Hades." The ruler on the throne coldly looked down, telling him word by word, "Failure is not a humiliation. Fear is." At that moment, Hades froze in place. He subconsciously opened his mouth to speak, but did not dare to speak. He could only tremble. He was afraid that his words would be judged as a lie. But at the same time, he was also afraid that the king of Withered was telling the truth. "Look, Hades, you are afraid, but you are not afraid of me, because you are not afraid of death." The king of Withered laughed mockingly. "You are afraid of a person from the present, afraid that he will bring you failure, afraid that you will relive the humiliation of the past and not be able to raise your head again. Hades, tell me, am I right?" In the silence, Hades was stunned, his face twisted, but he did not make a sound. He did not have the courage to refute. But at the same time, he found that he could not control his anger. Was that resentment after being humiliated, or was it anger after having her true thoughts exposed? "Why don't you speak? Hades, you can speak freely." In a long silence, the figure on the throne looked down at him and grinned mockingly. "I admire your talent, but I love your defeated appearance even more. It's like a wet wild dog hiding under the eaves, seeking shelter. You are unwilling to hide your claws and fangs, but you can't resist the charity of others. Whether you intend to resist or offer your loyalty, I look forward to your actions." Hades pressed his fingers on the ground, trembling slightly. "I am afraid. There is no need to be afraid, no need to be ashamed, and no need to be afraid, because I have already enjoyed your performance." The king of Withered probed, full of curiosity. "I just want to know, do you have the courage to step on the stage again?" Hades was already sweating, and he pleaded with a trembling voice, "Please, give me another chance." "How many legions did you lose?" the king of Withered asked. "4. Other than that, how many losses were there?" "Tens of thousands of cursed vessels and 6 large groups." "Then, I will give you 8 legions, double the number of weapons and cursed vessels, and 12 large groups." The king of Withered waved his hand. "Other than that, I will give Gala—" "Forget it. Gala is bent on going to the present state, and he may not be willing to cooperate with you. Let him be his vanguard. Other than him, you can choose a few people from my subordinates to cooperate with you. Also, don't those workshop owners want to participate? Let those good-for-nothings bleed a little." "Yes," Hades said hurriedly, "I will definitely—" "You don't have to promise, because I don't care." The king of Withered interrupted him and just raised his finger. "As for this, take it as a reward for your repeated failures." A tragic scream sounded from below the steps. Just in front of Hades, a long rusty nail appeared out of thin air. In an instant, it wedged into his eye sockets, went deep into his skull, and grew rapidly. It brought a pain that went deep into his soul. It would accompany him forever. Now, you can please me again, Hades. With the king of Withered's words, the door behind Hades opened again. When Hades staggered out of the door, what he saw was endless shadows in the huge square. Only pairs of scarlet eyes slowly looked up, like ferocious stars that dotted the darkness. They quietly waited for his orders. Trembling in pain, Hades covered his face, and his smile gradually became hideous. Chapter 1040. I keep having the feeling that someone is thinking about me. In the former Dragon Scale settlement, Huaishur suddenly sneezed. He wiped his nose and said with certainty, "There must be a young lady thinking about me." "You can forget about it." Raymond rolled his eyes. "Maybe it's a man thinking about you? Then you should reflect on yourself." Huaishur thought for a moment and asked curiously, "Why aren't there any men thinking about you?" Raymond's expression twitched, and he began to reflect from the bottom of his heart. Why did he have to be entangled with this little bastard? But what was even sadder was that he realized that this wasn't the first time he reflected. Why didn't he learn from his mistakes? It was better not to get involved in this kind of topic next time. "I say, can you hurry up?" He stared straight at the shadowless lamp above his head, lying on his back on the operating table. The front of his chest was wide open. Indeed, there was nothing wrong with being wide open in the physical sense. After the skin opened up on its own, there were no longer any bones and internal organs of an ordinary person below. After going through the 4th level transformation, he had completely become a part of Sunship and could switch between flesh and steel at any time. Now lying on the operating table was like a Terminator lying on a machine tool waiting to be modified. With the experience from last time, Huaishur was already skilled this time. He took the electric screwdriver and nimbly removed the screws and steel plates, and then filled in the other equipment and instruments that had just been completed. After screwing the screws, Huaishur patted Raymond's arm. Without needing to be told, he turned over with familiarity. On his back, a port popped out from the steel spine. What came next was the highlight of the show. Huaishur opened the incubator beside him and carefully picked up an iron box that was as big as a heart. It was cold to the touch, and in the short few seconds it was taken out of the box, it was covered with a layer of cold mist. If it wasn't for the gloves, his fingers would almost be frozen on it. "Bear with it," Huaishur said. "The temperature will be a little low." Hurry up, hurry up." Raymond clenched his teeth and closed his eyes. Then, his face turned ferocious, and he couldn't help but let out an ear-piercing scream. This was because the liquid in the iron box had already been injected into the center of his spine and was rapidly spreading throughout his body. An evil chill instantly covered him from the inside out. His steel heart was beating wildly, constantly producing heat as hot as a furnace. However, that heat could only protect his soul from being completely torn apart by the evil chill that came from the metamorphosis of the calamity. It could not stop it from spreading. The moment the injection was completed, Huaishur quickly retreated and raised his arm to cover his face. A frosty wind blew in his face. Raymond had already been frozen into an ice sculpture. Strands of residual liquid fell from the iron box, shrouding the entire crude operating theater in a bleak white. If it weren't for the fact that Huaishur's origin substance was able to resist the corrosion of the disaster, he probably would have been caught up in it as well. Even with the ultimate seal, the temperature of the entire Dragon Scale settlement instantly dropped by a lot, causing countless kobolds to shiver and tremble. Nether River Beta Serum. After Huaishur completely boiled the entire 100 Eye settlement into boiled cabbage, the liquid substance extracted by Gregory was combined and cultivated with Raymond's own blood plasma to produce the result. It was also one of the necessary parts for high-level ascendance of the Eternal Road. In the primordial curse, its predecessor was called the Water of the Nether River, because it possessed the essence of the abyss and the terrifying low temperature of matter. It was enough to freeze and destroy everything it touched. But for Sunship, Anubis, and even Osiris and Horus. This was a blood tissue component that ascendants had to have in their bodies. Otherwise, the human nerves would not be able to connect tens of thousands of different instruments at the same time, transmit a lot of information while resisting the terrifying high temperature brought about by the operation of the body. It was a protective layer between the soul and the body, ensuring that the soul of the ascendant would not be burned by overly large miracles. It was like the water-cooling liquid in the chassis. With its existence, there was the possibility of operating and overclocking at ease. At the same time, it was also the foundation of a series of operations. Otherwise, it would be a joke to the lifespan of the ascendant and sun ship. Even if it was the eternal road, low-level ascendants would not be able to withstand its terrifying low temperature and corrosion of the soul and body, unless they had undergone a qualitative change of the fourth-grade origin substance, and the soul had completely merged with the miracles. Rashly installing, it would be courting death. Now, Raymond had been completely swallowed by the evil coldness in the blood plasma. But under the thick layer of ice, the pair of eyes still flickered, revealing a luster. As time passed, the cold air emitted began to slowly decrease, as if it was sealed in the body. Gradually, the temperature of the entire operating room returned to an acceptable level. Soon, under the layer of ice, Raymond's fingers moved with difficulty, and his eyes looked at Huaishur. Call for help. Huaishur picked up Ah Fong and saw Raymond's frightened expression under the layer of ice. After hesitating for a moment, he switched to the hand hammer in the operating box. The layer of ice was shattered in no time, and Redmond walked out of it, shivering. He could barely stand straight. His body was still emitting a terrifyingly low temperature, and there was no trace of blood. I'm freezing to death. His lips trembled, and his face was pale. Water. Do you have hot water? Come, big brother, drink molten iron. It's strong. Huaishur picked up a sealed metal bucket and stuffed it into his arms. It had been prepared a long time ago. Raymond's body temperature was still 100 degrees below zero. Ordinary water would probably be completely frozen before being poured into his mouth and would have no effect at all. No, the engine's power is still not enough. I almost couldn't withstand it. Redmond kept sneezing as he hugged a bucket of molten iron to keep warm. Huaishur was beside him, constantly changing new ones for him. Relying on the heat of the furnace, the heart's engine was constantly pressurized, and in any case, he had endured the most difficult period. In the end, the conditions in the infernal realm were simple and crude. Otherwise, the entire set of equipment would have been replaced, along with the skeleton. However, the stick's blood plasma, which had been rushed at the last minute, was something that was barely passable. It would probably have to be replaced in the future. Now, with 2 rooms, he could barely survive. Compared to Raymond, who was about to freeze to death, the red dragon in the workshop was full of firepower. In the high temperature of the wheel cabin, the sun ship roared. F***K, I'm burning, 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 burning. That's it. No way. Beelzebub controlled countless mechanical arms to prepare, and at the same time, he spoke in a strange tone through the broadcast. No way. Don't tell me some country body is so excited just because it has a trash engine added, right? At least I have an engine. It's better than some people who don't even have an engine and an incomplete body. The red dragon sneered. What's wrong? Why aren't you talking, stinky brother? You broke the defense? Just you wait, dog. I'll King install Osiris's self-destruct array for you now. Come, whoever's scared is a dog. Dog barks again. Dog, don't be scared. Dog barks again. In the deafening roar, Gregory, who was controlling the secret device, could not help but scratch his head. He looked at Anton and said, These two have been arguing since the morning. Is there something wrong with their heads? One is an AI, and the other is a dragon. They're getting along quite well. It's fine as long as there are no delays. Anton calmly looked at the reading on the large screen. The operation of the second production line is a bit unstable. Those dog-headed people are too slow. Huaishur's crows are better. Let them work 2 more shifts. Sleep? No sleep. Gregory looked at the crows working hard in the secret device and crossed his legs in satisfaction. At this moment, the entire dragon scale settlement had almost become a super large production workshop. Under the cover of Fishball's secret device, this place could be regarded as the interior of Helios, isolated from the corrosion of hell. The laws from the reality operated here, covering all the steps of production. It only took Anton 3 hours to finish the first workshop, starting from a lathe that was moved out of the storage of trucks. Other than the casting and rough processing parts, which are separated and handed over to Huaishur, the rest of the forging, stamping, welding, heat treatment, and even assembly and testing were all done by him alone. Unfortunately, the requirements for electrical engineering were too harsh and could not be achieved freely. Some parts and important equipment could only be used from the storage truck or simply dismantled and modified. The gap was still too large. In contrast, the need for manpower was not so exaggerated. Most of the miscellaneous tasks were done by the dog-headed people, and the parts of the production line that required coordination and precision operations were handled by the crows. Under the incentive of the reward, the crows' enthusiasm for work was high, and the results were outstanding. By the way, Huaishur's reward was the mysterious disc that Raymond hid under the cabinet. The progress of the project was smoother than expected. In order to really verify whether they had the ability to modify the sun ship, they did not bite off more than they could chew from the beginning and only chose the outer armor project. Huaishur provided the materials and forging, and after being processed and modified by Anton, it was finally etched and refined by Gregory. The whole process was supervised by Beelzebub. It only took a day for all the armor to be produced and assembled. All the parameters were up to standard. Except for the lack of durability due to the rough production process, there were no shortcomings. However, no one expected it to be strong for long. At most, it would last for a month before it was completely modified in the reality. In addition, Professor Anton and Gregory also worked together to try out the precious materials provided by Five Eyes and the remaining nails to make 2 sets of engine units. As expected, one set of equipment was scrapped, while the other set of equipment was a success after the former had accumulated enough experience. Now that the assembly was completed, it was equivalent to temporarily adding a small heart to the sun ship, directly increasing the output of the sun ship by 30%. This caused Beelzebub to be a bit intoxicated for the past 2 days. He kept muttering nonsense like gambling on ships to change fate, great construction to create miracles, constantly urging Huaishur to go to hell to create a few massacres so that Osiris could be created as soon as possible so that he would no longer be annoyed by the red dragon, just like this. After a short 36 hours, as the door of the casting workshop opened, a ferocious and towering silhouette appeared along with the explosive entrance of the red dragon. The sun ship that was shining with golden light in the past had now become pitch black and had expanded by more than 1-fold. Layers of thick armor covered the body of the ship, completely becoming a part of the ship along with the transmission matrix. Its appearance also became like dragon scales under the miraculous catalysis of the sun ship. Just like how the sailing warships of the past had entered the era of ironclad warships in the blink of an eye. Thick smoke billowed out of the chimney, but the bow of the ship still retained the image of the dragon head of the past. In the middle of the ship, the huge sail branded with the sacred emblem of Bahamut swayed without wind. The oars on both sides stirred up the empty water of the Styx River, and a blade-like light appeared. It's better, it's better. Even though Raymond had shouted not to be so fierce at the beginning, he was now hugging the steering wheel excitedly, unwilling to let go. It could only be said that this was indeed the path of spending money. You got what you paid for. After gritting his teeth and spending money in the 100 Eye settlement, his bird gun immediately changed into a cannon. Next, it's almost time to visit the remaining friends. Huaishur stroked his chin and smiled with anticipation. 1.5 days should be enough for them to receive news of the destruction of the 100 Eye settlement and react, right? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.